Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean, historical Western romance by Emma Ashwood. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. So grab a cozy spot, kick back, and let this story whisk you away to a different time and place. Enjoy. Copyright Emma Ashwood. The Unwanted Bride's Savior by Emma Ashwood, Chapter 1. Molly Ryan had flour up to her elbows and a damp tendril of hair plastered to her glistening forehead. Even though it was chilly outside, the bakery ovens and the effort of kneading the dough for the following day kept her warm. She paused for a moment to brush her hair away from her face, leaving a streak of flour across her cheek. Daniel, the paper boy, rushed into the bakery, letting the door crash closed behind him. Miss Ryan," cried the small, dirty paper boy. "Sakes alive, Daniel," said Molly Ryan, not a little irritated at the interruption. "What's got into you?" The boy again gulped and said, "You need to come, now." Molly dropped everything, quite literally. The dough she had been kneading was now on the floor. There was only one reason for Daniel to be running in like this. "Graham?" she asked. Daniel nodded. Molly ripped off her apron and left the bakery at a sprint. She ran the few blocks home, not caring that her hair had fallen loose, not caring about the glares from disapproving women and stares from admiring men. This might be it for Graham. Molly would never forgive herself if she were not there when Graham, but she couldn't think of it. It was a matter of minutes before she was in their small tenement apartment. Graham? Molly couldn't believe how small her grandmother looked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she knelt beside the bed. As usual, Graham's weak, bony hands were resting on a newspaper. Molly moved the paper, placed it on the stack next to the bed, and took her grandmother's hands in her own. "Graham?" Graham's eyelids fluttered open, and Molly breathed a sigh of relief. She wasn't gone. Yet. Graham's yellowed eyes caught Molly's blue ones, and she smiled weakly. "Molly," Graham whispered, "remember, lass, your father knoweth what thing you have need of before ye ask him." Graham stopped for a moment to catch her breath and then continued. "You're a good girl, my Molly. The Lord knows you deserve a good life. He'll bring you one, lass, and ye must take it when he does." With her last breath, she whispered, "I love you, Molly girl," and then she was gone. It was 2 days after the funeral before Molly noticed the paper. Molly had spent the previous week getting Graham ready for a proper funeral. Graham deserved at least that, even if it did cost Molly every penny of her savings. Instead of resting, Molly chose to work. She was cleaning their home, going through Graham's few treasures, and looking for keepsakes. She had gone through almost everything, leaving the stack of newspapers for last. Molly knew that Graham loved reading the papes, as Daniel called them. Molly suspected that Graham started taking the paper because she liked Daniel's incessant chatter, but in the end, she ended up enjoying the actual reading of them. She had refused to allow Molly to burn them before her death, so the stack had grown quite tall. Molly looked at the stack and wondered if she should just throw out the lot and save herself some time. But no. As silly as it seemed, the papers were a favorite of Graham's, and she felt she owed it to Graham to at least go through them. She sat on the floor of her tenement, pulled her grandmother's papes toward her, and glanced at the paper on the top of the pile. It was the paper her grandmother had been holding right before her death. The Matrimonial Times? What in the world was this? Molly began reading and became more and more shocked with every line. Then she became indignant. Just what did Graham think she was doing? The Matrimonial Times was a paper dedicated to advertisements for wives. Some entries had been circled, and judging by the shakiness of the line, Graham had circled them herself. The more she read, the more Molly's exasperation grew. Why in the world would Graham's last act be to marry Molly off? She couldn't help but be offended. "Widower seeking mother for his children, Montana Territory," Molly read out loud. Another offered, "Texas rancher in need of a wife, must be good at cleaning." For the first time since her grandmother's death, Molly wished that Graham was alive for the sole purpose of scolding her. There was no way on God's green earth that Molly would marry some desperate man out west who was looking for nothing more than a free nanny or a housekeeper. One last advertisement was circled in her grandmother's shaky hand. 30-year-old sheriff looking to share his love, life, and soul with a wife in Deadwater Creek, Wyoming Territory. Well, now, this one didn't sound that bad. Molly shook her head, chiding herself at that stray thought. There was no reason for her to leave her home. Life was perfectly fine here in New York, all alone, without family and next to no friends. Something was familiar in that last line. Hadn't she heard of Deadwater Creek before? She knew she had, but she was too exhausted to try to remember. Well, it didn't matter. It was nothing to her. Daniel knocked on Molly's door and came in. "Hello, Miss Molly. Is there anything you need help with?" Molly smiled as she stood and stretched. "No, I don't think so, Daniel. I'm finishing up here." She paused, looking around her, and her eyes fell upon the papers again. Something was nagging her. "Actually, Daniel, maybe you can. Have you ever heard of Deadwater Creek?" "Sure, I have," said Daniel. "Don't you remember? That's the place Sally Walsh ran off to. She found herself a husband through the papes and up and left last year." "Oh my goodness, that's right," said Molly. How could she have forgotten? She had been friendly with Sally Walsh, and it had been such a surprise to everyone. Sally Walsh had worked in the laundry next to the bakery before heading off to Deadwater Creek to be married. "Daniel, you know something?" Molly declared. "What, miss?" "Sometimes I think my grandmother was crazy." And then, for the first time since Gram died, Molly sat down and cried. Molly couldn't sleep that night. She missed Gram very much, but she was also angry and hurt. How dare her grandmother try to marry her off to some Wild West cowboy? Why in the world did Gram think that was a good idea? "It's not as if I can't find a husband on my own," she fumed. There had been plenty of offers. With her flaming curls and bright, clear blue eyes, Molly was never short of suitors. She had refused them all to take care of her grandmother. Well, that and because the suitors had all been stupid and drunk most of the time. Molly was irritated at the idea that Gram thought she couldn't find a man of her own. To be honest, it was a relief to be irritated instead of sad, so Molly indulged in it. There is absolutely no reason, Molly thought, to be wandering off into the Wild West for some cowboy husband out in the middle of nowhere. Molly's thoughts came to an abrupt halt at that. The middle of nowhere, meaning lots of space. That was interesting. What would that be like to be able to look for miles and see nothing but grass and sky? No, absolutely not. Who wants to be the housekeeper in some man's sprawling ranch house? She was better off working in the bakery, every day, in the heat, then come home to a very small tenement apartment that she could barely afford. Molly looked around her. The bed took up almost the whole room, sidling up against the small stove in the corner, too small to give off much heat. She shared a water closet with 20 other people. A house with actual rooms, even small rooms, sounded luxurious. But Molly knew she could never marry a person she did not love. And who, really, could fall in love through letters? Except she could imagine herself loving a man who said things like, "Share my love, life, and soul with a wife." That didn't sound like someone who was horrible, but it was ridiculous. Molly put the idea out of her mind and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. She tossed and turned. She counted sheep. She even cried a little. She was so tired. Finally, Molly lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. "All right, Lord, what do you and Gram want me to do?" she said out loud. She felt her muscles relax, and she began to drift away. When she was almost asleep, she thought she heard Gram's last words. "The Lord knows you deserve a good life. He'll bring you one, lass, and ye must take it when he does." The very next day, she wrote her first letter to Deadwater Creek, mostly so that she could sleep again. She wanted the letter to be swift and impersonal. After all, she wasn't really trying to get married. She was trying to appease the spirit of her grandmother. She wrote a short, impersonal letter in which she introduced herself and asked a few questions that made her sound interested, but not too much. She addressed the letter and mailed it on her way to the bakery. Time went by quickly, and Molly fell into an easy and boring routine. She got up every morning, worked at the bakery, came home exhausted, and fell asleep almost as soon as she lay down. In the midst of the daily monotony, Molly had almost forgotten about her letter. She only vaguely wondered about it in the few nocturnal moments while she hovered between wake and sleep. So it was a shock when, nearly a month later, she received a letter from the sheriff of Deadwater Creek. She was standing in the doorway of her tenement, unable to enter the room with the letter. It was as if the moment was too shocking, too big for that tiny space. She didn't know what to do. Open it, of course. That's what she should do. But what if the sheriff didn't like her? Then, annoyed at her own silliness, Molly ripped open the letter with trembling hands and began to read. Deadwater Creek, Wyoming Territory, August 18th, 1880. Dear Miss Ryan, I was so pleased to receive your letter in this morning's mail. I enjoyed your letter very much. At your request, I will tell you a little about myself, my family, and Deadwater Creek. My name is William Cecil, and as you learned from my advertisement, I am the sheriff of Deadwater Creek. I valiantly fight for peace and justice in our fair town with an eye singled to the glory of God. I live in a comfortable house behind the sheriff's office with my mother Agnes and my younger brother Hank. My mother is an angel of a woman. She is loving, kind, and patient, and has sacrificed her life for the welfare of her sons. Her greatest desire in life is to see me happily married and Hank well taken care of. She is a giant among women and is greatly admired in Deadwater Creek for her long-suffering and incredible talent in quilting. Some people say that Mabel Young is the best quilter in town, but we all know that Mabel can't make a stitch good enough to close a wound. The Quilting Society only invites her for her pound cake anyway, and even that is too dense to be called good. We all know the truth that it is dear Mother Agnes to whom we extend the greatest quilting honor. I do hope that we can continue to correspond. I believe you would like our little town of Deadwater Creek, even if it does have that dreadful name. I don't know what old Elias Carter was thinking when he named the town. He didn't have enough sense to shake a stick at, and by the time we all realized he was crazy, we had already made the sign. But Deadwater Creek itself is beautiful. During summer nights like tonight, I walk outside my door and sit in the chair Mother keeps on the porch. There's not a soul around, and there is no human noise, just the crickets and the bullfrogs singing their songs. The sky is crowded with stars, and the night is so clean and fresh that it feels as if the stars are an arm's length away. I sometimes think that if I stretched a little, I could grab one and keep it tucked away forever. I would save it for someone, maybe you. A body feels close to God in this country and on these nights. It feels as though we soak in some of his powers just by being in this beautiful place. I hope someday you can join us, Miss Molly Ryan. I look forward to the day when you do. Sincerely, Sheriff W. Cecil. It was like a dream, this letter. True, he did seem overly fond of his mother and more involved with the Quilting Society than most men have a business to be. But then again, why shouldn't he be? His mother sounded lovely, and a sheriff must know all the goings-on of a town, even regarding the Quilting Society. But the final paragraph, Molly read it again. Stars so close it feels as if you could grab them. What would that be like? And going outside and the only noises being crickets and what did he say? Bullfrogs? Molly had never heard the ribbiting of a frog before. When Molly went outside at night, she heard only babies crying for food, neighbors having another fight, and the occasional horse clomping down the street. Molly had to admit that she was fascinated by Deadwater Creek, and though she was almost embarrassed to think it, she was also fascinated by Sheriff William Cecil. Chapter 2. Molly hadn't intended to continue corresponding with William Cecil, yet she found herself thinking about his letter the next day while she kneaded the dough at the bakery. She silently composed an appropriate letter on her walk home. She lay awake that night until she could stand it no longer. She got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, lit a candle, and wrote to William Cecil. She told herself that it would be the last letter. In fact, whenever she received a letter from the sheriff, she told herself that she wouldn't write back. But she did. His letters were charming, filled with details about his mother, the townspeople, and his brother Hank. But these details were not what interested Molly. The October letter was the one she read most. It came on a gray afternoon when the bakery windows were running with steam, and she carried it home unopened in her apron pocket, the way a child carries a sweet it means to save. Dear Miss Ryan, your letter arrived on Tuesday, and I have read it 3 times, which Mother says is twice more than a sheriff has leisure for. She is wrong, as she is about most things that concern my leisure. You asked after Hank. Hank has brought in 41 pumpkins this year, which he counted twice, and he has told me the number 9 times, which I did not count but could have. Mother is putting up the last of the tomatoes, and the whole house smells of vinegar. Mabel Young called on Sunday with a pound cake, and I regret to say the pound cake has been offered to the hogs, who declined it. You asked whether it is lonely here. I will answer you honestly, because I would rather you knew the truth of the place than came to love a lie about it. It is lonely. In the winter, it is lonelier still. But it is not the same loneliness as a crowd, if you take my meaning. Out here, you are alone with something, not alone from it. The aspens have turned. I don't know if you have aspens in New York. Here they grow in families along the creek. And in October, the whole family goes gold at once, as if they had agreed on it. When the wind comes through, the leaves shake like 1,000 small coins, and the light on the ground moves with them. I stood under them yesterday evening until it was too dark to see, and thought that if a person could bottle that sound and send it, I would send it to you. Since I cannot, I have sent this letter instead, which is a poor trade. Sincerely, W. Cecil Molly read it standing up, and then she sat down on the bed and read it again. Then she went and looked out of the window, though there was nothing to see but the wall of the next building and a line of gray washing, and tried to picture a family of trees agreeing to turn gold. She could not do it. She had never seen an aspen. She was not entirely certain what one looked like. She answered him that night when the tenement had gone as quiet as it ever went. Somebody was coughing on the floor above, and somebody else was singing, badly, in the street. And Molly sat with the blanket around her shoulders and her paper on the breadboard across her knees. She told him about the ovens and how she was the one who lit them at 4 in the morning because Mr. Kessler's hands had gone bad with the rheumatism. She told him about Daniel and the papes and how Graham had circled his advertisement in a hand so shaky the pen had gone through the paper in one place. She told him she had never seen a mountain or a frog or a tree that grew in a family. She did not tell him about the smell of the stairwell, or that she shared a water closet with 20 people, or that the stove in the corner was too small to warm the room she was sitting in. Those things were true, but they were not who she was, and she found she wanted him to know who she was. At the end, she wrote, "I do not think it is a poor trade at all. I have read your letter 4 times, which is one more than you read mine, so I win." Then she looked at that for a long while, wondering if it was too forward, and sealed it before she could change her mind. Daniel carried it to the post office for her in the morning. He turned it over in his dirty hands and squinted at the direction. "Wyoming Territory," he read out slowly. "That's a long way for a letter to go, Miss Molly." "It is," she agreed. "You writing to a fella?" "I am writing to a sheriff," Molly said with great dignity, and gave him a penny to stop him grinning. It did not work. William Cecil always wrote about Deadwater Creek toward the close of every letter. His descriptions of the beauty of the land and the way it made him feel caused her heart to ache. His December letter celebrated, "It snowed today. The snow here is deep, white, and clean. It glistens in the moonlight, and for one moment the world is hushed and still." "It is bitter here," his February letter noted. "The trees are frozen and gray, yet the roots are under that frozen crust, getting ready to come alive again." These phrases were what Molly couldn't resist replying to. The sheriff's letters became the highlight of Molly's months. She would read each one many times until the folded edges became delicate. She had read the letters so often, she had some of the more beautiful lines memorized. She found herself thinking about these phrases at work while she kneaded bread or waited for loaves to rise. More and more, Molly wondered what it would be like to be in Deadwater Creek, living in a house with many rooms. She wondered what it would be like to hear crickets and frogs at night and birds during the day. And, cheeks warming at the thought, she wondered what it would be like for William to say those beautiful things about her. Molly paused when she realized that she had never thought of him as William. She had always referred to him in her mind as the sheriff, or William Cecil. These thoughts felt somehow scandalous, and she wasn't sure what to do with them. After all, what if William Cecil was one of those men who knew how to say the right thing but was cruel in actuality? What if he was ugly? So much could be said in a letter to fool someone. After Molly burned her third loaf of bread that week, she decided to stop being foolish and gather facts. While she tried to salvage any of the last batch, she decided that her best course of action was to write to Sally Walsh and ask about the sheriff. She lived there. She would know about him. If Sally says he's a good man, then Molly promptly wrote the letter and sent it. If she was lucky, Sally would reply before the next letter arrived from the sheriff. Daniel, who missed nothing, noticed that there were now 2 letters going west instead of 1. "Are you fixing to marry that sheriff, Miss Molly?" he asked, walking backward down the street in front of her so that he could watch her face. "I am fixing to mind my own business," said Molly, "and I suggest you do the same." "That's a yes," Daniel told a passing dog. Molly was not lucky. Not 1 week after she sent Sally's letter, William's letter arrived. "Dear Miss Ryan, thank you for your last letter. I have so come to enjoy them over these last 8 months. Please forgive me for this short letter today, but I want to be direct. Miss Ryan, I am writing to ask if you would please come to Deadwater Creek and consider being my wife. Of course, there will be no obligation to marry until we meet, and you are satisfied with our circumstances. If you choose to come, please send word by telegram about the train you will be on. I have included money for a train ticket. I await your reply. Sincerely, William A. Thrill," went through Molly. There it was. The moment she had always known would come. She had answered an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times after all, but she was still shocked. And would she go? Somehow, she had never allowed herself to think about the outcome of her correspondence with William. But now she must. A part of Molly wanted to be somewhere different, where she could feel the way William's words made her feel. But this felt so daring and adventurous, and Molly had been neither of those. Molly was steady and responsible. Dropping everything to move west to marry a stranger felt neither steady nor responsible. But there was something. Then she remembered Graham. Graham had wanted this for her. Graham had wanted her to have an adventure. Graham had told her when the Lord gave her a chance at life, she needed to take it. And she wanted to, Molly realized. She wanted a different life. She wanted beauty and space. She wanted William. The next day, feeling very daring, Molly told Mr. Kessler that she was leaving. He did not take it well. He put down his rolling pin and looked at her over the top of his spectacles as if she had announced she was going to the moon. "Wyoming," he said. "What is in Wyoming?" "A sheriff," said Molly, "and mountains, and a bakery that doesn't exist yet." "There is a bakery here that does exist. It exists because you light the ovens." He shook his head. "You'll be back inside a month. They don't have bread out there. They eat beans." "Then I will teach them," said Molly. But she made his bread for him one last time before she went, 4 hours of it, and left the loaves cooling under a cloth with a note propped against them that said only "thank you." Mr. Kessler pretended not to see her go, and she pretended not to see him wipe his eyes with a floury wrist. There was not much to pack. Her Sunday dress, her working dresses, Graham's Bible with the papers pressed flat inside it, the bundle of letters tied with a bootlace because she had no ribbon. She gave the stack of newspapers to Daniel, who was more pleased than she expected, and the last of Graham's pennies she gave to the woman on the floor above who had the cough. Then she walked to the telegraph office and stood at the counter and could not think for a moment how to say it. The clerk waited. He had a pencil behind each ear. "Coming. Arrive with the Thursday train." She counted the words and paid for them, and then, because there was money left over, she added, "M. Ryan." It seemed important that he should know it was really her. On her last night in New York, she did not sleep at all. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the babies and the neighbors and the horses in the street, and she found that she was not afraid. She had thought she would be. Instead, she was only awake, the way she was awake at 4 in the morning with the ovens to light and the whole day still to be made. Chapter 3. Agnes Cecil had the telegram in her apron pocket, and she took it out and read it again while the coffee boiled, though she knew it by heart. Coming. Arrive with the Thursday train. M. Ryan. Thursday, today. She had lain awake half the night with it, and not from nerves. Agnes did not have nerves. She had lain awake the way a general lies awake, going over the ground. William had left at first light for the Pratt place, where somebody's fence had been cut, and would not be back before supper if she had judged him right. She had judged him right for 30 years. Hank was in the garden. That left the morning to her, and she meant to use it. First the book. She took it out from under her mattress and held it a while, and then put it in the top drawer of her bureau under her good gloves, where it would be to hand when the time came. All through the summer she had borrowed it a night at a time and put it back before he missed it. Since October she had simply kept it. He had not gone looking. He had not written a line in it in more than a year. That was the trouble with William. He put the best of himself down on paper in the dark and then shut the drawer on it, and a woman could grow old waiting for him to open it again. So she had opened it for him. She did not feel one bit sorry, and she had told the Lord so, and he had not yet seen fit to argue. She stopped in the doorway with her hand on the frame and waited for the flutter under her ribs to settle. It did, after a moment. It always did so far. Then Hank. She found him on his knees among the pea rows and stood over him until he looked up or nearly up. Hank, the train comes at 3. You're to take the buckboard and meet it, and you're to look for a young lady named Molly. She has red hair. You can't miss her. She considered him. You bring her straight home, Hank. Say it back to me. Meet Molly at the train. Come home. Bring her home. Bring her home, said Hank, and went back to his peas, and Agnes told herself that would do. It was very nearly right. Then town. She put on her good hat and walked down the boardwalk in the April sun, nodding to everybody, and everybody nodded back because everybody knew. She had seen to that. Bill Crowley had it, which meant the men had it. Jane Robinson had it, which meant the women had it. Creed had it, which meant it had gone up the creek with the drovers and down it with the mail. If William tried to put that girl back on a train, he would have to do it in front of the whole county, and Agnes did not think he had the stomach. She looked in at Jane's. It's come, said Jane, before Agnes had the door shut and put a small box on the counter between them as if it were a bird's egg. Agnes opened it and looked at the ring for a long moment. Plain gold, nothing fancy. William would not have wanted fancy, and neither, she thought, would the girl who wrote those letters. Wrap it, she said. I'll send him for it. Don't tell him what it is. Agnes Cecil, said Jane, delighted. You are a wicked old woman. I am an old woman in a hurry, said Agnes. It looks the same from the outside. She was halfway home when it took her, not the flutter, the other thing, the fist, and she had to stop and put her hand on Ed Miller's hitching rail and stand there breathing like a landed fish while the street went white and came back. Nobody saw. She made sure nobody saw. When she could walk, she walked, slowly, and got herself in at her own door and into the rocking chair, and sat with her eyes shut and her hand pressed flat over the place, and did sums. 3 o'clock. She could not go to the station. She would have to let Hank do it alone. And Hank would do exactly what she had told him and not one thing more, and there was no help for it now. Well, Lord, Agnes said aloud to the empty room, you brought her this far. You can walk her the last mile. She rested a while. Then she got up and put the kettle on, because a girl who had crossed the country would want to wash her face, and Agnes intended to be standing at that door when she knocked. Hug ready, as if nothing in the world were the matter. The trip across the country was fascinating. Molly had never lived away from crowds and buildings, and seeing actual land and sky was exhilarating. She marveled at the great stretches of land as far as she could see. She loved the uninterrupted horizon. When she changed trains at Omaha, Nebraska, she sat by the window and watched the landscape. The mountains that began appearing were beautiful, and she could hardly believe that she would be a part of this land. She wondered what William might say about all this beauty. Thoughts of William sent a thrill through her. She had known many men, and she had suitors whom she liked reasonably well, but she had never felt more than a simple interest. She was surprised that she could feel this strongly for a man she had never met. The idea of marrying any of the men she had known had always terrified her, but with William, she felt only excitement and anticipation. After a long week of travel, Molly's train pulled into the Deadwater Creek station. She shielded her eyes against the mid-afternoon sun as she emerged from the train. She scanned the platform, seeking out a man likely to be William Cecil among the few people, although she wasn't sure of his appearance. She noticed a short, plump young man with overgrown, sandy hair and large blue eyes standing unnaturally straight at the far end of the platform. She approached him slowly, hoping he would ask who she was. He didn't, though. She looked around and saw no one else. This man had to be waiting for her. There was no one else about. He had to be there for her. Molly made her way to the young man. He looked both confused and tired, as if someone had plopped him down and not told him where he was or what he was supposed to do. This could not be William Cecil. "Mr. Cecil? Hank?" Molly ventured. She hoped this was Hank and not William. "Yes," he replied loudly. "So you are Hank, William Cecil's brother?" "Yes," he said in the same tone. He neither extended his hand nor made any effort to introduce himself. "Oh, hello, I'm Miss Ryan." She walked up to him and extended her hand. He looked at her hand and then looked at her. "I'm here for someone named Molly," he said in a loud monotone. "Oh, well, yes, that's me." When Hank still looked confused, she added, "Molly is my name. You said your name was Ryan." "Molly Ryan. Mother said I'm supposed to meet you here." Hank walked down the stairs of the platform and toward a buckboard parked off to the side. He did not look back. At first, Molly was surprised. She was hoping for some sort of introduction or pleasantries. Instead, she got nothing at all. Molly hurried to catch up to him. She made it down the steps before Hank slapped the reins and the buckboard took off, without her. She was stunned for a moment, but only just. "Wait," Molly called. She began chasing after the buckboard, dust drenching her. She ran with her bag in hand, bumping against her leg with each step. She felt her hat fly off and her hair work loose of its pins. She ran as far as she could, but it was hot and she was tired from traveling and couldn't run in her skirts. Finally, in desperation, she shouted, "Hank, stop!" She hadn't expected this to work, but it did. Hank. Hank sat in the buckboard and stared ahead, waiting for her to approach him. He made no effort to help her. Finally, with sweat dripping down her forehead, she caught up to the buckboard and gasped, "Hank, why would you leave without me?" He looked at her with his big, innocent eyes and in all seriousness said, "Mother said I needed to meet you and then come home." Molly stared at Hank for a moment, and then she began to laugh. "My mother's greatest wish is to see Hank taken care of." That's what William's letter had said. Now she began to understand. Hank had done exactly what he was told, no more and no less. He meant precisely what he said, she suspected, and expected everyone else to do the same. It was she who had misunderstood him, not the other way around. Molly sighed. "Well, I suppose you did exactly what she told you. Do you suppose, now that we've met, you could take me with you to your home?" "Yes," he replied without breaking a smile. "You can't imagine how glad I am to meet you," Molly said as she struggled to climb in unassisted, carpet bag and all. Hank said nothing. Molly tried to initiate a conversation. She asked about the town and their home. She even asked about the quilting society out of desperation, but Hank didn't have much to say. Finally, Molly decided to sit back and enjoy the ride through Deadwater Creek, and the silence seemed to suit Hank just fine. They entered town, and Molly was fascinated. The town wasn't as small as she had originally presumed. She had pictured a few houses here and there, with maybe a post office and a saloon. That's all that was ever mentioned in the dime novels about the Wild West that she had read. But Deadwater Creek was so much more. The town was not as crowded as New York, of course, but it was, nonetheless, alive with activity. There was a saloon, but also a general store, a barber, a doctor, and just about anything else a body would need to live comfortably. Men stood in circles, discussing crops or whatever men talked about, and women were coming in and out of the general store with their goods. One woman caught Molly's eye. She wore a pretty red dress and a straw hat, and she was leaving the general store, piled high with brown packages. Molly grabbed Hank's arm and said, "Hank, stop for just a moment, please." Hank stopped without a word, and Molly climbed down. "Sally? Sally Walsh?" Molly called. The woman looked up. Molly thought she looked a little frightened until she recognized Molly waving, then grinned. "Molly Ryan!" Sally juggled the parcels, trying not to drop them in her excitement. Molly rushed to her and took a few off the top of the stack. "Hank, could you come help us?" Hank got down and dutifully removed the parcels from Sally's arms to put them in the back of his wagon. He stood awkwardly in one spot while the women hugged and laughed. "Oh, Molly!" exclaimed Sally. She pulled back to look at Molly. "What in the world are you doing here?" "I've come for the same reason you did," said Molly. Sally's face dropped as she looked from Molly to Hank and back to Molly. "Oh, Molly, why didn't you write me? I could have." "Oh, no," said Molly hastily, cutting Sally short. "Sally, I'm sure you already know, but this is Hank Cecil, the sheriff's brother. I've been writing to the sheriff, and Hank was kind enough to collect me from the train station today." Sally looked relieved. "Oh, how nice. But still, Molly, I wish you would have written me." I Sally was cut short again, but this time by the approach of a young man who had come out of the saloon. "Who you talking to, Sally?" The young man put his arm around Sally's shoulders, and Molly assumed him to be Sally's husband. Healed. Molly was suddenly very conscious that she wasn't wearing a hat, and her hair was probably a disaster. "Joshua," Sally said. Her voice was softer now than before, but barely. "This is Miss Molly Ryan. We were friends back home. Molly, this is my husband, Joshua Duster." "Oh, you had friends?" He laughed at his own joke, though Molly thought it was in bad taste. "Well, it is so good to see you, Molly. Let me be the first to welcome you to Deadwater Creek." He extended his hand. Molly hesitated to take it, just as she had hesitated with the young man earlier, although she wasn't sure why. Joshua Duster was an attractive enough man, tall with a full head of blonde hair and blue eyes, but Molly only wanted to wash her hands after shaking the hand of the man who reminded her of a snake. "Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here." Molly finally took his hand and shook it, only briefly. "I guess I better get going, Hank." Molly turned to see Hank standing right where he was before, looking off into the horizon. "Hank, could you please help Mr. Duster with Sally's parcels?" Hank started unloading the packages, and Joshua moved away from Sally to help transfer them to his wagon. Sally gave Molly one last hug, and while she did so, Sally whispered in Molly's ear, "I wish you would have written me first. Good luck. Be sensible." And then she was gone before Molly had a chance to tell her that she had tried. Sally climbed up beside her husband and gave a faint smile. Molly waved, but Sally didn't wave back. Hank climbed back into his buckboard and Molly followed him. He urged the horses into motion. "Hank," Molly said, "what do you know about Joshua Duster?" Hank replied in the loud monotone that Molly assumed was Hank's normal voice. "He's not nice." Molly wanted more details, but was sure she would not get more from Hank. She decided that, as soon as she was settled, she would go out to Sally's ranch and see what Hank meant. After only a few minutes, Hank pulled up to the sheriff's office, the last building on Deadwater Creek's Main Street. Hank drove around the side of the building and stopped the horses. Molly climbed down, grabbed her carpet bag, and tried to calm the nerves in the pit of her stomach. Without saying a word, Hank walked into the sheriff's office. The office was one large room with a desk at one end, which Molly assumed was the sheriff's desk, and two vacant jail cells on the other. "Where's the sheriff?" Molly asked nervously. "He's not here," said Hank. Molly was relieved. Hank continued to a door in the back wall. He knocked on the door and it was opened by a small, wiry woman with a shock of snow-white hair. Hank pushed past her without a word. "You must be Molly," the woman exclaimed, clapping her hands once in front of her face. "I'm Agnes. You've heard so much about me, I'm sure," the older woman said, as she pulled Molly into a rib-crushing hug. As she spoke, she relieved Molly of her bag and threw an arm around her shoulders. Agnes steered Molly through the door and into the house. Once Molly was through the door, Agnes carefully locked the door to the sheriff's office behind her. "Don't mind Hank. We don't give him keys to this door for reasons I'm sure you figured out by now. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with Hank to greet you at the train station, but, well, things came up." She released Molly and looked at her. You're just like I pictured, except for all the dirt on your face. Goodness, you look like a zebra, all streaked like that. What in the world happened to you?" Molly was confused for a moment until she got a look at herself in the mirror hanging on the wall just inside the door. Her hair was a mess. Half of her wild curls were free of their pins and straggled around her face, with the rest still tangled in hairpins. And yes, she did have sweat-streaked dirt covering her face. And she had met Sally like this. Molly was mortified. She had completely forgotten about her mad dash behind the buckboard. "Oh, I must look a fright. Well, I got caught up in some dust and then the sweat after running." She stopped. She didn't want to get Hank in trouble. Agnes waved her hand. "You don't have to say any more. Hank probably took off without you. I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. Hank," she called over her shoulder, "you silly boy. Grab Molly's bag and take it into the spare room while I help her clean up." She handed Molly's bag to Hank. Molly followed Agnes into a large room that was twice the size of Molly's small tenement apartment in New York. To the right of it was the kitchen, and the room itself boasted chairs and a shelf of books. She knew it wasn't polite, but she couldn't help herself. Molly stopped and stared open-mouthed at the table covered with a pretty floral cloth, surrounded by 4 wooden chairs. The iron stove stood against the wall beside a wide basin. She looked up at a loft above the sitting area. "It's not much," said Agnes when she noticed Molly's gaze, "but it's nice enough." "No," said Molly, "it's wonderful." She noticed 2 doors to her left and 1 door to the right. She couldn't believe there were more rooms besides this one. "Let's go get you cleaned up." Agnes pulled Molly toward one of the doors to her left. Hank walked past them, crossed the room, and exited the door on the right. "Don't mind him, dearie. He's uncomfortable with change, and he's frightened of new people. He's probably gone out to his garden. He loves it out there. Anyway, here we are." They entered a very small, clean room with a bed and a small chest of drawers. "Well, this will be your room until we can until the wedding. There's a wash basin there." She pointed at the bowl and pitcher on the bureau. Just then, they heard the door leading to the sheriff's office open again. "Mother?" she heard a deep voice call. "Drat," said Agnes. "That's William, and he's home early. Goodness, hurry, Molly dear, and clean up. I'll try to distract him." Agnes hurried out of the room. Molly didn't like the sound of that. With the unused towel in her hand, she followed the old lady out the door. "Agnes, what do you mean, distract him?" "Ooh," Molly stopped. In the kitchen, next to a fluttering Agnes, stood William Cecil. He was the biggest man she had ever seen. He was tall, and the expanse of his chest was, well, she wouldn't think of his chest right now. It made it hard to breathe. He was standing with his hands on his hips. If Molly could think straight, she might have considered his pose intimidating. Although he wore his hat pulled low over his eyes so that she couldn't see them, she did feel them. "Mother, someone in town said they saw Hank driving a girl." William's sentence trailed off when he saw Molly standing in the doorway of her room. He stared at her. Molly had the notion she should put on a few more layers of clothing. Oh, good Lord, she thought as she nervously tamed her hair. She was a mess. As if he could read her thoughts, his eyes paused for a moment on her dirt-streaked face. Molly's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Why in the world didn't she wash her face before she left the room? She hastily wiped her face with the dry towel and began to chatter nervously. "I'm very sorry to meet you like this, Sheriff. Of course, I look a mess. I had a mishap of sorts getting here, but I'm so very pleased to finally meet you. Just give me a moment to clean myself up, and we can be talking about, well, any arrangements that we might need to make." Molly stopped talking. One look at William's face told her that he was undoubtedly confused. "Who are you?" he finally asked. Chapter 4. It was Agnes who answered, as if this was any normal occurrence. "This is Molly Ryan." "Why is she here?" Agnes took up the broom leaning against a wall and began sweeping the clean floor. Molly was annoyed. She knew William must be busy with his sheriff duties, but really, when you invite a woman to move halfway across the country with the expectation of marriage, you really should try to remember her name and her arrival date. "She?" Molly answered when it was clear Agnes wouldn't, is here because you invited her, and I think you're being a very ungracious host. Agnes polished the spotless mirror behind William and began humming. William looked at his mother and then back at Molly. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have no idea who you are. No idea. Molly was beginning to forget that William was twice her size. Her voice was rising with anger. You invite me to move clear across the country and then have the nerve to say you have no idea who I am. What are you talking about? I never invited you to come to my house. You are a despicable man. How dare you write me for 8 months? 8 months, and beg me to move across the country and then deny the invitation. Molly was furious. She whirled around and marched back into her room. She flung her carpet bag open and rummaged in it until she found the small bundle of William's letters. She marched back into the kitchen and stood toe-to-toe with him. Here. She slapped the bundle of letters on William's chest, and he fumbled to grab them before they fell. William's eyes widened with surprise, and his mouth quirked in a kind of a smirk. This did nothing but fuel Molly's indignation. How dare he laugh at her? Are you going to deny that those are your letters and your words? Demanded Molly. She folded her arms across her chest. She could feel her eyes blazing. At least she hoped they were. William looked at the letters in his hands. Well, yes, ma'am, I am. The wind was taken out of her sails, and she stepped back. What? Agnes had stopped cleaning, gathered an armful of vegetables, and carried them to the table. These aren't my letters, said William, examining them closely now. But I think I know whose letters they are. William turned to look at Agnes, who had an onion in her hand and was chopping vigorously. Mother, William said, slowly moving toward Agnes, his voice deceptively calm. Did you write these letters? To her? He nodded in Molly's direction. And then sign my name to them? Molly stood frozen. She wasn't quite sure what was happening. William hadn't written the letters? E.L. Agnes continued chopping, and Molly wondered how she could remain so calm. Technically, you wrote some of the letters. But yes, I did sign your name. What? Molly gasped and dropped into a nearby chair. This was a nightmare. William closed his eyes as if willing patience from the Lord. Mother, did you invite Molly Ryan here? Without telling me? William's lips were getting tight, and his words sounded strangled. Well, obviously I did. She's here, and you didn't know about it. 1 and 1 make 2, William. Agnes turned back to her onion as if she were discussing the grocery list with her son. Wait just one moment, Molly interjected. Both William and Agnes looked at her. Are you telling me, Agnes, that you wrote these letters to me? Well, mostly I did. I was hoping to break it to you a little more gently than this, but here we are. She began chopping carrots now. Molly felt sick. It was you? All this time, I fell in, oh no, she groaned. Did you also place the advertisement in that paper? What paper? William looked slowly from Agnes to Molly and back to Agnes. Yes, dear, I did. Agnes finally showed a little regret. I'm sorry to have lied to you, dear, but I didn't know what else to do. What paper? William asked again. The Matrimonial Times, dear, Agnes replied. She grabbed a large pot and began piling the vegetables into it, and Molly answered the advertisement. William looked at Molly again. She put her hands on her forehead and rested her elbows on her knees. Agnes continued talking in her calm, matter-of-fact way. I've been writing Molly on your behalf for about, what has it been, dearie, 8 months. I fully intended to give the letters to you, William, and have you write her back, but they were so engaging. I didn't want you to mess it up, and before I knew what was happening, you asked her to marry you. Molly was too stunned to speak, and she suddenly felt very claustrophobic. She needed to get out. She got up, not caring what William or Agnes might do, and took the exit Hank had taken earlier. William was furious at his mother. He had suspected she had been scheming, but nothing at this level. To write to a strange woman for 8 months in his name? To convince her to travel across the country? To propose to her on his behalf without his knowledge? It was too far this time. Mother, are you insane? He was doing everything in his power not to shout at her. No, dear, his mother said conversationally. It was infuriating that she could maintain her composure while behaving in an insane manner. I am not insane. I am the only person in this home who is thinking straight as a matter of fact. You need a wife, plain and simple, William. She turned back to the counter and continued her food preparations. William threw his hands in the air. Says who? Says me. Don't you think she's lovely? I really love her hair. William began pacing the floor. I don't need a wife, Mother. We are all doing fine the way we are. I like things the way they are. You, me, Hank, it's fine. I think you'll like her. Her letters were very polite, and she's pretty. I was sure she would be plain, otherwise, why wouldn't she be married already? But what a pleasant surprise she is. William shook his head and said, almost too softly to hear, I don't want another wife, Mother. That's your fear talking, William, and it's about time you move on. No, Mother, you're wrong on this one, and it's not fear. I just won't love anyone again, and that is that. Agnes stopped chopping and William stopped pacing. She reached a hand to her son's cheek, something she hadn't done since he was a child. What a very sad way to live, my dear heart. She removed his hat. Don't wear this in the house. William growled in frustration. She can't stay here. There's no room. Where will she sleep? He thought he had a very good point, but Agnes laughed. In your room. Where else? And if you're not ready to get married, you can bunk with Hank in the loft. William sighed and slumped into a chair by the table. He held his head in his hands. This was by far the worst mess his mother had landed him in, and that was saying something. Don't you sigh at me. She's here, like it or not, and there's nothing you can do. Not for 7 days, anyway. Why 7 days? He asked without lifting his head. That's the next time the train goes back east. That's plenty of time. God only needed 7, you know. I'm not God, of course, but I'm as close as we got. William stood in protest. Plenty of time for what? Agnes continued as if she couldn't hear him. Now, William, stop sulking and go apologize to that beautiful girl. She snuck out while you were lecturing me. And leave your hat here. It makes you look intimidating. Pross a good look for a sheriff, but not a beau. I'm no one's beau. He put his hands on his hips and shook his head. He wanted to strangle his mother. But you're right. That girl deserves an apology, but not because of anything I did. William walked toward the door after Molly. Of course, dear, replied Agnes. She smiled as he walked outside without his hat. Chapter 5. Molly stopped as soon as she stepped outside. She was all but stunned by what she saw, no matter where she looked. It was early evening, and the sky was orange and pink with twilight purples starting to appear. It had been a warm day, but it was beginning to cool. Molly hugged her arms across her chest and breathed in the fresh air. So William had not been writing the letters to her. He did not propose to her. She fell in love with words on paper instead of a man. She felt foolish. She had always known marriage wasn't a guarantee, yet she still felt as if she had lost something. William, or rather Agnes, had written in the final letter that there was no obligation to marry, so an engagement had never been official. How could she mourn what she never had? And what was she going to do? She was without the funds to return to New York, although she was pretty sure William would pay her way back. He was upset now, but he seemed a kind man. But there was nothing to go back to. She had no job and no family. Molly began walking on the damp earth of early spring. The Cecil yard was so vast. She marveled at all the open space. Everything was so crowded in New York and so loud. But here, she stopped to listen. She could hear crickets. She had been looking forward to this moment more than any other she had imagined. She remembered how appealing the idea of hearing crickets had been when she read William's first letter. The idea of hearing crickets had been forever intertwined with any feelings she had developed through their letters. She had loved that a man could appreciate the specialness of something so simple. That sentence had opened Molly's heart and allowed her to dream of a bigger life for herself. But it hadn't been William. Her heart squeezed, and she allowed silent tears to run down her face. She was so disappointed, more than she cared to admit. She had entertained the romantic notion that hearing crickets for the first time would be a signal of the start of her new life. Instead, it was the sound of heartbreak. She looked up at the stars and wiped her face. She was glad it was getting dark. She didn't want anyone to see how foolish she was being. She thought about Graham and tried to be angry at her for getting her into this mess, but she couldn't. She looked around her. No matter what happened, she knew it had been a beautiful week. Graham told her to take a chance at life, and she had. So it hadn't turned out the way she had hoped. There was always a fresh tomorrow, as Graham had once said. She looked up at the sky and quietly spoke to God or Graham or both. "I'm here. What do I do now?" A breeze ruffled her hair and she smiled. She imagined Graham telling her to hold on. The stars were starting to appear in the purple twilight. She felt as if the sky was so close that she could grab it and wrap it around her shoulders. The world was so close. Molly didn't want to leave. Molly saw a figure crouching next to a garden plot that looked ready for planting. Molly approached Hank. "Hello, Hank," she said. He nervously stood up and looked in her direction, but not at her. She noticed the way in which he never really looked at her, but rather past her. She wondered what he saw. "Hello, do you want to see my garden?" Molly smiled. Hank said what he meant and not a word more. She was learning. After a day of everyone else's hidden meanings, there was something restful in that. "Yes, I believe I would." She followed Hank as he walked up and down the patch, pointing in the fading light. He talked about places and patches for various vegetables. She smiled as he described in his loud monotone how he would first plant the peas, where the strawberries would fare best, and when the tomatoes should best be planted. "You really like seeds and plants, don't you, Hank?" "Yes, they are very easy. You just plant them and then wait. I like them better than people." Molly smiled. She liked Hank. "I'm very impressed with your plans." Hank stood up. "You can have some strawberries and peas when they grow, but you have to be patient and wait for the seeds." She smiled. "That sounds lovely. I would like that, Hank. Thank you." Hank walked away without a goodbye. "He likes you?" said a deep voice behind her. Molly startled slightly and turned around. William was behind her, lit by a square of light shining from inside the house. He stood with one leg bent and his hands in his pockets. He had removed his hat, and Molly could finally see his head of thick brown hair, the color of bread when it was left in the oven 10 minutes too long. "What?" I said. "He likes you. Hank doesn't like many people, especially when it comes to his garden. If he offers you the fruits of his labor, he likes you." "I like him too," Molly replied. She was unsure what to do with William standing so near her. She suddenly felt as if she had too many arms or toes, and she didn't quite know how to hold herself. William cleared his throat. "Miss Ryan, would you like to take a walk around the property? I think we need to talk." "It's getting dark out." "I know, but we need to talk, and we can't do so indoors where the walls have ears." "I guess we could go to my office, but it's a pleasant night. One of the first we've had this spring. I can help you if you can't see in the dark." Molly thought about this. "Well, I can't argue with any of that. And yes, I think we do need to talk." William started walking, and Molly fell into step beside him. He put his hand on the small of her back to guide her through the shadows of the early evening. She felt the warmth of his hand through her clothes and realized the size of his hands. She felt warm and safe, rather than scared, and she thought how appealing it was to have someone watching out for her. She had always been the one to worry about others. First, her ailing parents, and then Graham. And then she wondered how those hands would feel on her. She was very glad it was dark outside, so he couldn't see the blush that burned her cheeks. Where had that thought come from? He led her to the edge of the property, where a cluster of aspen trees were starting to bud out for spring. William stopped and leaned against the trunk of an aspen, and Molly stood across from him. Her back was cold without his touch, and Molly crossed her arms. She waited for William to speak, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at her in the dark. The air felt heavy, and Molly wasn't sure what was happening. Molly finally looked away. Someone needed to say something, or she would surely pass out from the tension. "Mr. Cecil," Molly began at the same time William spoke. "Miss Ryan." They smiled silently, and she gestured for William to speak first. "Miss Ryan, I want to apologize for this whole blasted day. As you have probably figured out by now, you were brought here under false pretenses. I don't need a wife, and I don't particularly want a wife." He paused for a moment. "I'll pay for your passage back, of course." Molly nodded at this and rubbed her arms as a breeze blew between them. She shivered, but not because she was cold. She didn't know what was making her feel this way. Maybe it was being out here at night, alone with this large, handsome man. Maybe it was her sudden desire for this moment never to end. Maybe it was because she realized how badly she wanted to stay right here and to get to know this man. It was true that she had boarded the train because she had started to fall in love with the man behind the letters. She could admit that now, but he hadn't written them. Shouldn't she feel betrayed and angry? Shouldn't William come across to her as the stranger he was? Why then didn't she see him as a stranger? She knew she should be sensible and agree to leave. William saw her shiver. "There's a cool breeze a-blowing the stars around tonight, isn't there?" He took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm. It smelled of him. Molly looked at William thoughtfully. "What did you just say?" "I said there's a cool breeze a-blowing the stars around." He paused for a moment. "That sounds funny, doesn't it? I don't usually speak like that out loud. Mr. Cecil." She paused for a moment as a thought occurred to her. "What did your mother mean when she said she mostly wrote those letters to me?" William chuckled and shook his head. "I don't ask questions much anymore. I don't know if you noticed, but my mother pretty much says and does what she wants. These past 8 months, she's gotten it into her head that I need to get married, and nothing would shake that fool idea loose. And now this. I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." "I'm not," said Molly. For all her disappointment, she realized that this was true. She looked at William. It was dark now, but she could make out the shape of him as he casually leaned against the tree. He was handsome with his dark hair and powerful body, and this place was beautiful. "The Lord knows you deserve a good life," Graham had said. "He'll bring you one, lass, and ye must take it when he does." Molly decided right then that she was not going back to New York. Ever. "Mr. Cecil," Molly ventured, "this week I rode the cars all the way from New York to Nebraska and then changed trains to come on to Deadwater Creek. I've seen golden plains as far as the eye could see. Today, I've seen snow-covered mountains so tall there's no way I could have imagined them on my own. And now I'm standing here. This might not look like much to you, but to me, it's heaven. Do you know, I've never seen a tree like this in my life. I've never seen this much emptiness. I've never heard silence before. So no matter what happens, I do not regret coming here. If nothing else, I will always have this night." William looked as if he was trying to solve a puzzle to which Molly held the solution. Finally, William cleared his throat. "There's not another train for 7 days. You can stay with us for that long, at least. After that, I guess you can make your own plans. But I just wanted to be clear about this whole marriage business." Molly smiled and nodded. "I'll wait then." She began walking back to the house with William's jacket still around her shoulders. "For what? The train?" he called after her. She stopped and turned around. "No, for seeds to grow," she said, almost too quietly to be heard. Then she turned and continued toward the house. What had just happened? When William had touched her tonight, he lost all his good sense. William had come out to apologize and to make it perfectly clear that he did not want a wife and that she would be on the first train back to New York. Instead, he had stared at her like a love-struck schoolboy and talked about blowing stars or whatever fool words had come out of his mouth. William watched Molly Ryan walk back to his house. She was nothing more than a dark silhouette in the indigo night. He admired her tiny waist and the curve of her hips. Mother had been right, he thought. She certainly wasn't plain. Mother had mentioned her hair, but it was her eyes that he had noticed first. He had thought them blue before, but wondered if they were in fact green. They seemed to flash green when she was angry. He had to laugh when he thought back to the moment he had seen her for the first time. She had been standing in the doorway of his room, hair aflame and with a dirt-streaked face. He thought then that she was lovely. And then her eyes started flashing green when she was angry at him, and she was downright beautiful. He had also noticed her full mouth. It looked so soft. When he put his jacket around her shoulders, he had briefly wondered what they would feel like on his. He shook his head to get rid of the image. It didn't matter how attracted to her he might be. He would never marry again. He had said so when Elizabeth died. He stopped himself. It was no good thinking like that. William began walking back to the house. What did it mean that she was going to wait for seeds to grow? That sounded like something Hank might say. Grow into what? It was going to be an interesting 7 days, to say the least. Chapter 6. When Molly returned to the house, it was to find Agnes sitting in a rocking chair next to a bright lamp, crocheting. As soon as she saw Molly, she started chatting away as if they had been talking for 10 minutes already. I am sorry to have lied to you, Molly dear, but you see why I had to now. William is just so stubborn. To be perfectly honest, if I had known you looked like this, I would have had you come months ago. But I needed to be sure. He was nice to you out there? Agnes nodded toward William's jacket. Oh yes, he was a perfect gentleman. Molly thought about taking the jacket off but didn't want to. He is a nice boy, but he gets silly ideas about life and loyalty, and there's no changing his mind with logic. You gotta rattle his cage once in a while. Molly sat in a chair across from Agnes. I have to ask you, Agnes, you had to know that he would be upset as soon as he found out what you had done. To be honest, I should be very upset too at being thousands of miles away from home with no idea what to do. Why did you ask me here? Yes, you should be angry at me, but you're not, are you? I thought you wouldn't be. Do you think you're the only woman to answer that advertisement? Not by far. You're the only one I liked, and the only one I thought good enough to understand. Agnes stopped crocheting for a moment and dropped her hands into her lap on top of her crochet work. She looked Molly in the eye. William needs you, and he's too stubborn to know it. I know my son better than he knows himself, and I picked the woman he needs. She tapped the side of her nose confidently. Give him some time and he'll figure it out. Thank the Lord you're pretty. It wasn't necessary, but it does make our job easier. He'll come around. Trust me. She retrieved her work and said, You haven't learned it yet, but you will. Agnes is always right. Molly laughed and stood up. On impulse, she bent to kiss the old woman on the cheek, then retired to her assigned room. Agnes had lit a lamp, so there was a soft glow in her room. She closed the door and stood there for some time, feeling the reality of the day. Had she been on the train only that morning? She felt as if she had lived 3 weeks since then. She heard William come in from outside, and she felt the weight of his jacket still on her shoulders. She had 7 days before William expected her to be on the train back to New York. Agnes said that he just needed time. Would 7 days be time enough? And did she really want to marry a man who was a stranger? Outside, in the beauty of the night, she had been sure that she wanted to stay here and possibly marry this very handsome man. But here in the reality of the house, she wasn't as sure of herself. A bare room was not as romantic as the outdoors, under the stars and with a light breeze. Molly sighed and removed the jacket. With it went the last of the magic of the outdoor moment. In all the excitement of the evening, Molly had yet to clean up after her travels and unpack. She looked at her frightful appearance in a mirror. She certainly wasn't very pretty now. No one would want to marry her like this. She wet a clean cloth in the water basin that was still full, thankfully, and washed her face. She loosened her hair, and it was only then that she noticed that Agnes had unpacked for her. Her brush was on the bureau next to the basin, and further inspection produced her nightgown in the drawers and her other things put away in logical places. She was finally ready for bed. She knelt by her bed and recited her prayer, but then paused at the end. God, I don't know what you have planned. I'm going to need some help down here, and tell Graham I'm trying my best. Amen. She slid into bed and put out the lamp. Molly woke up in the early morning and couldn't go back to sleep. She was still on bakery hours, which meant that she was usually up by now to have bread ready for the morning customers. She had stayed up late into the night on board the train to train herself to sleep at normal hours, but it had obviously not worked. She was wide awake, and the Cecil household seemed to be sound asleep. She lay in bed, willing herself to go back to sleep. But she finally gave up. It was no use. Molly dressed in the dark, splashed water on her face, pinned her hair back, and eased her bedroom door open. She didn't want to wake anyone, particularly not William. She wasn't sure where he slept, but he was the one person she wasn't ready to face today. She made her way to the kitchen and lit a lamp. She realized for the first time that she was hungry as she hadn't had supper the night before. She quickly inspected Agnes's supplies and decided that she might as well do what she did best in the morning: make bread. William hadn't slept yet. He was up, chewing on this whole mess with Molly. He hated that his thoughts kept drifting back to her eyes and her hair and how his hand fit the right way on her back. But he wasn't going to marry again. And these two thoughts caused enough commotion in his head to keep sleep at bay. He heard someone up and moving around. At first, he thought he had stayed awake all night worrying and that Agnes was already up and making breakfast, but it was still too dark and quiet for that. Mother was a small woman, but she made plenty of noise, especially when cooking. He looked over to make sure Hank was still asleep, and he was. It must be Molly. William sat up and leaned on his elbow. His position in the loft gave him a pretty good view of the kitchen. Molly had lit one lamp, and he watched as she worked in the soft yellow light. She warmed a kettle of water. Then she combined the warm water with honey and sprinkled something on top of it. She added salt, and he chuckled silently as he watched her throw some of the salt over her left shoulder to appease her superstition. Gradually, she added flour to the water mixture, mixing first with a spoon and then with her hands when it became too thick. Eventually, she tipped the whole mess onto the table and took to kneading the dough. William was fascinated. His mother made bread, but when she did, it was a clumsy and clanking affair, like watching Agnes wrestle with the devil. But Molly was almost silent, and her fluid movements were gentle. Her small body swayed with the dough until the goop turned soft and elastic. It was amazing to William that the mess she had started with was now smooth and clean and entirely altered. She paused to push the red ringlets off her forehead with her wrist, and William marveled at the loveliness of that moment. He watched as she lifted the dough back into the bowl and covered it with a cloth and left it to rise. He lay back down and listened to the soft sounds of her working. He finally relaxed and fell into a restful slumber. Chapter 7. William woke to the smell of freshly baked bread and something else. The sun was peeking in through the windows. He crawled down from the loft, which was difficult. He hated the loft. He was a large man and didn't enjoy crawling around on his hands and knees in small spaces. He might consider marriage just to have his bed back before the week was over, he thought. He finally lumbered down and turned toward the kitchen in time to see Molly bending to remove something from the oven. He paused a moment to admire her backside, but then quickly looked away. Molly turned and smiled when she saw him. "Just in time. These are best when they're warm," she said, setting a tray of sweet rolls on the table. "Give me a short minute and I'll have them frosted. Then you can have one." "How long have you been up?" William asked, even though he knew full well how long. "Oh, about 4 hours. I worked in a bakery back home and my body must think I still work there. I was up way too early, but I figured I might as well make myself useful. Your mother won't mind, will she?" Mind? William looked at the kitchen. It was clean and tidy. In fact, were it not for the 4 loaves of bread on a cloth, ready to be wrapped, and the tray of sweet rolls, no one would have known the kitchen had been used at all. "She'll want to marry you herself just for your bread. She hates baking bread and can't manage it without leaving the kitchen looking worse for wear." She had been frosting the rolls while he talked, and now she handed him one. He took a bite and groaned. These were the best rolls he had ever tasted. They were tender and warm, with buttery cinnamon and sugar dripping on his tongue. "What do you think?" Molly asked. She had a look on her face that let William know that she was aware of just how good these rolls were. "These are the best cinnamon rolls I've ever had," William said with his mouth full. Molly grinned. "I know. I was known for them at the bakery. I'm glad you like them." Agnes came out of her room just then. "What in the world has been going on out here?" "Molly, did you do all this?" Molly nodded as she handed Agnes a sweet roll on a plate. "Sit down, Agnes. Huck, I thought I'd give you a break and make some sweet rolls for breakfast. When does Hank usually get up?" Agnes waved her hand. "Oh, don't worry about him. Some days he's up early and others he sleeps in. I don't wake him. He's an ornery cuss when you disrupt his sleep." William polished off his second cinnamon roll and then stood. I guess it's time for me to go do some rounds. Much obliged, Miss Ryan, for the delicious breakfast. Of course, Sheriff, she said. William retrieved his hat and then stood looking lost for a moment. What do you need? Asked Agnes. William swallowed hard, looked at Molly, and said, Nothing, I guess. I'm fine. Then he left. Molly watched William walk out the door. He left his jacket, didn't he? She said to Agnes. She felt guilty knowing that it was in her room. Yes, but that was his choice. He's going to have to get over that skittishness pretty soon if you two are going to get married. Let's not talk about marriage, Agnes. We barely knew each other as it was when we were talking through letters. I thought I might be falling in love with the person who wrote the letters, which is why I agreed to come out here. But now... She stopped. She didn't want to guilt Agnes, but she didn't need to worry. Yes, I am sorry that I had to lie to you for so long, but I couldn't leave it up to William to get married on his own, and I liked you straight away. Agnes, said Molly, what did you mean last night when you said you mostly wrote those letters? Agnes smiled mischievously. I'll tell you another time. But dear, let me ask you a question. What was it that made you think you were falling in love with William? Molly paused for a moment. She was uncomfortable talking about this with Agnes, but the woman was looking at her so intently and waiting for the answer. It was his descriptions, like the crickets at night and the way the breeze blows. That was all William, darling girl. Rest assured that the parts that you fell in love with are the parts that came from William. This did make Molly feel better, but it still didn't solve the problem at hand. That's all fine, Agnes, but William told me he neither wants nor needs a wife. What can be done to change that? He seemed pretty sure of himself. Well, William is wrong on both counts. First, he does want a wife. He just doesn't know it yet. And second, he needs a wife. I won't be around forever. Here's the important part, Molly Ryan. Do you like William? If the William in front of you last night and today was the same William in those letters, would you marry him? Molly thought for a moment. I believe I would. Good. That's real good. I thought you were the one. She stood up from the table, cupped Molly's cheek, and looked at her just the way her mother once did long ago. I promise you, young lady, that I know my son better than he knows himself. He is the man in the letters, even if he did not write them. Molly could feel the weight of what Agnes was saying. I believe you, Agnes. Wonderful. Now that's settled. We've got work to do. Molly was finishing the dishes, and she was grateful to know there was something else to occupy her time. Oh, of course. Just let me know what chores you need doing. Anything to keep me busy. You silly girl. I'm not talking about chores. We've only got 6 days to get William to ask you to marry him. That's not a lot of time, but I think it can be done. Agnes, now wait a minute. Molly moved over to the table and sat in one of the chairs. William is already upset enough with everything that's happened, and there is something I have to say, so I will say it plainly. What you did was wrong. 8 months of letters in a man's name, and a proposal in his name too. I understand why you did it, and I have forgiven you. But that doesn't make it right. I won't do the same to him. I want him to seek me out of his own volition. I don't want him to be tricked into loving me. Well, Agnes folded her hands on the table. I can't say you're wrong, and I won't pretend I'm proud of the lying. I'm just not sorry it brought you here. But dear, when you're on a schedule, I've learned that it's best to make things happen rather than sit back and hope. That's why I'm here. Now, here are the facts. A man can be tricked into marriage, but he can't be tricked into love. He'll fall in love on his own, I'm sure of it. And you already care about him. I saw it when you were cuddling up in that jacket last night. But if we wait around for him, we'll be waiting until the second coming. Molly still didn't look convinced. Agnes added, Fine, don't think of it as tricking. Think of it as giving him every chance to see you. Molly shook her head, but she was smiling. No more tricks, Agnes, not from you and not from me. I'll go into town and be friendly, and I'll be myself. If William wants me after that, it will be because he chose to. If he doesn't, I'll get on that train. Fair enough, said Agnes. Not one more lie. You have my word. Molly was not entirely sure what Agnes's word was worth in this particular matter, but she took it. She wasn't sure that she loved William, but she was sure that she was attracted to him. She liked Agnes and she loved Deadwater Creek. Good, Molly said. What's first? Chapter 8. First order of business, Agnes said, is to get you out in the town. You need to be out and about. Introduce yourself to some of the store owners. I've been talking about you for a few weeks now in preparation, so the town is buzzing with gossip. Agnes, how long have you been planning this? Asked Molly. How long have we been writing? Replied Agnes dryly. Are you sure this is the first step? Don't you think I should, I don't know, take lunch to William or something? I think we should spend some time together. Molly stopped talking because Agnes was shaking her head. Well, that's what you get for doing your own thinking. This is why I'm here, darling. If I keep shoving you two together, William will get suspicious and accuse me of meddling. This way, the town will fall in love with you first. So when William tries to send you away, he'll get a talking to from everyone in town. He can deal with disapproval from me, but not his townsfolk. Oh, you are good, Agnes. Remind me never to plot against you. If you need reminding, you've already lost. Agnes insisted that Molly needed new clothes. Molly protested that she had brought several dresses, plus a very nice one that would work for a social event in a pinch. Granted, they were old, but Molly thought they were good enough. What you have is good enough for a city baker, dear, but it's not good enough for a sheriff's wife, Agnes informed her. You have to look the part. Plus, once we get that little figure of yours into a dress that fits you, William won't know where to look. Agnes, said Molly, reddening. What? Let's not pretend men don't appreciate a pretty girl. Besides, we've got to use every weapon in our arsenal, including your physical assets. Do I need to remind you that we only have 6 days? Besides, who doesn't love new clothes? I've been saving my spending money for 6 months for this exact moment. Molly could see that any attempts at argument would fall on deaf ears, so she didn't try. Besides, Agnes was right. She loved new clothes, and she hadn't had many in her life. She hated to take Agnes's money, but she suspected that she had no choice in the matter. Molly was to go to the general store while Agnes took her afternoon nap, with strict instructions not to come home until she had a new ready-made dress and orders for 2 more. And don't forget to be friendly. Say hello to the townspeople, particularly the men. They probably suspect who you are, so just create that nice first impression to go along with the name that I've been throwing about. Now, go, Agnes commanded as Molly stepped out of the house. Walking to the shop, Molly again felt that sense of excitement at being in a town straight out of the books she had read. It had one long main street, with stores lining both sides. Wooden boardwalks stretched along the road, giving people a place to walk out of the dust. She strolled along the boardwalk, nodding to everyone she saw, and taking special care to smile and say hello to the men. She passed the barber shop, with its door propped open, just as Agnes said it would be. Hello, she said, stepping just over the threshold. She looked at the barber, who she knew was Bill Crowley, thanks to Agnes's training. Are you Bill? I'm so glad to meet you. I hate to interrupt, but I was wondering if I could make an appointment for a cut and a shave for the sheriff? Bill Crowley and all the men in the shop stopped to stare at Molly. She smiled and waited for a reply. When it was obvious that the men were too surprised to offer one, Molly continued. Look at my manners. I'm so sorry. My name is Molly Ryan, and I'm visiting the sheriff's family. Do you have a time this week when I can send the sheriff in? It was another beat before Bill Crowley could answer. Yes, ma'am. I'm open tomorrow, right before lunch. Say 11? Molly widened her smile the way she knew older men appreciated. You are so sweet to work us in like that. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow. And then she left. She had to laugh to herself, feeling the men's eyes following her down the street. Agnes has this town pegged, she said to herself. She arrived at the general store, entered, and approached the girl at the counter in just the way Agnes had told her to. May I help you? The girl asked in a bubbly voice. Are you Jane? Molly asked. I'm Molly Ryan and Agnes. Of course, you're Molly Ryan. You're just as I imagined. Agnes has told me all about you and how we need to start right away on a wardrobe suitable for a sheriff's wife. Jane came out from behind the counter, grabbed Molly's hand, and dragged her to the back of the store where the dresses and fabrics were kept, all the while continuing her monologue. Yes, I'm Jane, and I've been given strict instructions to make you my sole priority. I'm so glad the sheriff finally asked you out here. He is very handsome. I would have married him in a heartbeat if he would ever look my way. And if Billy wasn't around, of course. Billy's my intended, you know. But the sheriff is awfully handsome, and he's one of the most important men in town. Don't tell Billy I said that. I couldn't if I wanted to, Molly said with a laugh. I don't know who he is. Oh, don't be clever, she said with a laugh that matched Molly's. Molly decided that she liked Jane very much. All right, let's see. Jane examined the wall of fabrics and then turned to examine Molly. Right, I'm thinking of jewel colors to go with that magnificent hair of yours. Definitely green and blue to match your eyes. I've got just the right fabric for you. Jane pulled down the fabrics, and Molly was dazzled. They were beautiful. Of course, she had seen beautiful fabrics and dresses on the women who came into the bakery back home, but this was the first time these pretty things were going to be hers. Those are beautiful. They are, aren't they? I ordered them on the off chance you would be arriving soon. You just sounded like a jewel person. Now, we need to get you a dress to wear while these are being made. An hour later, Molly admired herself in the full-length mirror. The new dress was a beautiful blue, and Jane said the color made her eyes look like the sky. The bodice skimmed her sides perfectly, setting her waist and hips into a perfect hourglass. The round neck showed off her delicate collarbones, and the sleeves were full and gathered, ending just above the elbow. It was a simple dress made for daily wear, but Molly had never worn anything so pretty. Oh, Molly, sighed Jane, you are stunning. If you and the sheriff haven't set a wedding date yet, you can bet he will hightail it to the preacher as soon as he sees you in this. Just then, Molly and Jane heard someone behind them clear his throat. Sheriff, exclaimed Jane. Molly turned around, and indeed, there was William. Hello, Miss Robinson, William said while staring at Molly. Hello, Sheriff, Molly said. Frantic questions flooded her mind. When did he come in? Did he hear Jane talking about a wedding? Was he upset? Probably in an attempt to regain composure, Jane began her chatter. I'm so glad you're here, Sheriff. I was just helping Miss Ryan with some new dresses. Doesn't she look lovely? You're one lucky man, Sheriff. William finally tore his eyes away from Molly and appeared to remember why he was there. Prosody Ratent. My mother sent me for some supplies, said William, but I can see that you're busy. Don't be silly, Sheriff. I'll help you in just 2 shakes, she said. A few customers had come in after William, and Jane left the two to help them. Molly wasn't sure what to do. She thought she should perhaps leave, but she didn't want to. She pretended to view the items lining the shelves, feeling William's eyes on her. She wondered if he liked what he saw. This was, after all, the first time he had seen her with a clean face and in a decent light, and she was wearing her new dress. Was her dress really that flattering? William had barely looked away since he came in. Molly tried not to stare at him by pretending to shop the shelves, but she couldn't help it. She had noticed how handsome he was the previous day, but it had been dark, and he was always brooding about in his hat. But now, in the light of day, without his hat to cover his hair and his eyes, she felt her knees go weak. He had piercing blue eyes and straight eyebrows that gave him an intent, thoughtful look, and she wondered what he thought about her. She also noticed the scruff that had grown in since his early morning shave. She briefly wondered how that might feel against her skin if he kissed her. She blushed and immediately abandoned the thought. Rather, she intended to, but it kept popping up when least expected. She could feel him watching her, and she fumbled with the spools of thread she was pretending to examine. Many men had looked at Molly in this way before, but this was the first time she had wanted the man to look at her. Per Agnes's suggestion, she pretended not to notice. Finally, Molly turned to face William, forcing him to look her in the eye. Is everything fine? She asked innocently. She could tell that she had caught him off guard, but he recovered very well. Yes, it's fine. You look real nice. She smiled slightly. Actually, Sheriff, I meant at home with your mother. I could have picked up the supplies for her. Molly expected William to hem and haw a little, or blush, or mention being caught staring at her. She certainly didn't expect him to break into a grin, which is exactly what he did. He looked down at his boots and back up, almost shyly, clearly aware that he had been caught. Ah, well, Mother said that she suddenly remembered that she had ordered something special and sent me to pick it up. Apparently, she forgot to tell you about it. Oh dear, Molly said. Agnes hadn't mentioned a package to her. This must be a part of the plan Agnes had orchestrated. She had only told Molly that she should get a new dress and that she would take care of the rest. This must have been what she meant. Jane finished up with the last customer and turned to William. Now, Sheriff, what can I get for you? Mother said she had something ordered and I needed to pick it up for her. Oh, yes, I do remember that. Excuse me for a moment. Jane went fluttering off and returned with several packages wrapped in paper. I don't get to see what she ordered? I guess not, Jane laughed, glancing at Molly and William standing beside each other. I'm so glad to finally meet Molly, Sheriff. Your mother has told me all about her, and I think she's lovely. William said nothing, motioning instead for Molly to exit ahead of him while he held the door. Molly thanked Jane, gave her a quick, friendly hug, and walked out the door. I guess Jane's heard it too, William said while walking. Molly was in step beside him, very aware of their arms occasionally brushing. What do you mean? Molly asked. Apparently, Mother's told the whole town that I rode away for a bride. Has anybody said anything to you? Only Jane. They walked past the barber's shop, and Bill poked his head out the door. Good afternoon, Miss Ryan. See you tomorrow, Sheriff. William looked at her and cocked an eyebrow. How does he know you, and what's tomorrow? Oh, I hope you don't mind, but I made an appointment for you for tomorrow around 11 o'clock, a cut and a shave. She was afraid he might be upset that she had done so without his asking. Instead, he shook his head. Let me get this straight. Today, you made me a cut and shave appointment with Bill Crowley, the biggest gossip in town, and then went to buy fancy new clothes from Jane Robinson, the second biggest gossip in town. This has my mother written all over it. Molly was getting ready to feign innocence, but William continued. I'm sorry my mother dragged you into this mess, and I'm sure you're just trying to be helpful, but it's awfully suspicious to me. Miss Ryan, be careful with my mother. She's sly as a fox. Molly nodded and tried not to laugh. I think she's lovely. That's because she wants you to think that. You laugh because she looks like a harmless old lady, but she could run this town if she had just a little go-ahead. Molly refrained from telling William that Agnes already ran the town, whether he knew it or not. Molly noticed that they had come to a stop in front of the sheriff's office. She grinned at him. Why, Sheriff? Did you just walk me home? I do believe I did, Miss Ryan. For the second time that day, William gave Molly a shy smile. Here, take this package in for Mother. I've got to get back to work. You should go in round back. I've got some more rounds to make, and Mother and Hank are probably taking afternoon naps, so they won't be able to unlock the door for you. Molly nodded. Well, thank you for walking me home, Sheriff. It was very kind of you. She was about to turn the corner to access the back door of his home when William called to her. Molly? She turned to see concern on William's face. Yes? Be careful going around town, will you? If you venture out again, take Hank with you. I will, said Molly. Thank you, William. Molly turned the corner of the building again and headed for the back door. How nice, she thought. That was the first time he had called her Molly. Chapter 9. William turned and worked his way back up the street without giving Molly another look. Heaven knows he did enough looking at the shop. He was embarrassed, recalling the blatant way he had stared at her when he first walked in, but he couldn't help himself. That new dress hugged her every curve, and she had caught him admiring her backside. What in the world had come over him? He didn't want a wife. He had made that plain as day, and Molly knew she was expected to be on the train home in 6 days. So why, for the love of everything that is holy, did she have to buy that new dress? It made her eyes sparkle, and it accentuated her waist in such a way that made William want to put his hands around it and pull her close. He had touched the small of her back last night while he was guiding her in the dark, and just his hands spanned her whole back. She was a tiny, gorgeous woman, and whenever she was around, he wanted to hug her. He found himself liking the protectiveness he felt over her. It wasn't fair, thought William, especially when she had to go home next week, because he asked her to. He didn't stop to think through that logic, but he knew there was a flaw in it somewhere, and he knew also that he was better off not addressing it. What he needed to do now was get back to work and forget about the way her eyes sparkled, or how the stray curls always found a way out of her hairpins, or the way she had looked at him when she thought he didn't notice, or the way he felt when her arms brushed up against him on the walk home. This was not helping, he thought. He needed a drink. That night at supper, William was quiet. He listened as Agnes asked Molly about her day, and vaguely heard Hank talk about his garden. The rest of William's day had not gone well. He had stopped by the saloon, but one drink hadn't helped him drown out Molly. In fact, he hadn't had a Molly-free second all day. Just when he had thought he could do his work without his mind wandering to her curves or her mischievous smile, he would encounter someone in town who would always ask after his new lady, Molly. Everyone seemed to know who she was, how she got here, and her reason for being here. How in tarnation did everyone in town know who she was when he had never heard her name before last night? He wondered if his mother had something to do with him seeing or hearing about Molly wherever he went. He was pretty sure she did, but he had no proof, and that made him angry. He had made his position clear to his mother, yet she persisted. He wasn't upset with Molly. She didn't know what his mother was capable of. It wasn't her fault that she was lured here under false pretenses. It wasn't her fault that she was beautiful, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't her fault that he felt guilty every time he caught himself wondering what it would be like to hold a woman, particularly this woman, in his arms again, or kiss her lips. It wasn't her fault that he imagined what it would be like to feel her skin on his. It wasn't her fault that when she was around, William forgot about Elizabeth for the first time in 5 years. Agnes, do you know Sally Walsh? I guess her name is Sally Duster now. She married a man named Joshua Duster about a year ago. Molly got William's attention. He didn't like Joshua Duster. He's a mean man, offered Hank. Hush, Hank, said Agnes. Well, I don't know her, really. I know of her. It was a big surprise to everyone when Joshua Duster rode away for a wife. No one ever had an inkling that he would want a family, since he's always been content with his own company, having no family to speak of. But she arrived, and we haven't seen much of her since. Do you know this girl? Yes, she's a friend from New York. She's the reason I decided to answer your advertisement, really. I knew she had come to Deadwater Creek, and word was that she was happy. I was hoping I could find her ranch and perhaps pay her a visit tomorrow. Oh well, if that's what was being said, then who am I to paint a different picture? She lives at Lionsgate Ranch. I don't know where Joshua Duster came up with that fool's name. He's never seen a lion in his life. Probably doesn't even know what a lion is. But it's none of my never mind. They live about 2 miles outside of town that way. She gestured. Joshua Duster is a snake, William interjected, and I don't want you going over there, Molly. Molly looked at William in surprise, and he could see the firelight in her eyes, and they flashed green. Well, Sheriff, I don't see how you have any say in the matter. You have made it very clear that I am a mere guest here, not any special relation over whom you have any say, and last I checked, we are still in the land of the free. She turned to Agnes. Is it too far to walk from here? Well, I'm still the sheriff in this town, and I don't... William's retort was cut short by Agnes. Oh, why walk? We can have Hank drive you over tomorrow. It might be good for her to have a little womanly company. William felt his jaw clench and his hackles rise. He hated being overruled, particularly when he didn't even get a chance to make an argument. Agnes glanced his way and chided, Oh, William, don't fuss so. She'll be fine. William fumed silently. He was about done with his mother for one day, and if she meddled or ignored his decisions one more time, he might just blow. The rest of the meal passed without incident, but it was quiet. Molly appeared to understand that she had caused some measure of tension, even though she might not know how. She kept quiet. Finally, the meal was over and Molly began to help with the cleanup. Molly, William stopped her. I can help with the dishes tonight. I would like to speak with my mother. Molly looked at Agnes, and Agnes nodded. As you wish, she said. Hank, would you like to show me your garden? I understand you've been hard at work today. He nodded and walked out the door. Molly followed with one last concerned glance over her shoulder. William cleared the dishes and stood by the basin in silence. So, Agnes began, what's eating you so much you needed to chase that girl out of here? You need to butt out, Mother, he said bluntly. He began pumping water into a pot to heat for washing dishes. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't done anything. Well, besides write to Molly under your name and invite her here. But nothing after that. Agnes was busying herself so she couldn't look at him. That's what she did when there was an argument brewing. You know what I mean. I couldn't go anywhere today without someone asking me about Molly. And why is that bad, William? People are curious about her. She's new in town, and you like her. I know you do. That's beside the point. The town magically knows that she came out here to be my bride. What they don't know, though, is that she's not actually going to be my bride. Someone conveniently left that part out while they were spreading gossip. Oh, William, what do you care what people say? She was wiping down the table now, but getting winded. She sat down for a rest and caught her breath as she watched William continue with the dishes. I don't care, but I know you, Mother. You don't give up easily. And I'm afraid this whole getting the town curious idea is one of your schemes, and you're dragging Molly into it. He turned to look at her. He folded his arms across his chest and leaned against the sink. Mother, I don't know how much clearer I can be. I'm not marrying again, and that's final. Why not, William? Because of Elizabeth? William silently stared at his mother. No one had dared mention Elizabeth for almost 5 years, but Agnes wasn't backing down. She had an intensity in her eyes that William only saw when she was going toe-to-toe with someone who got in her way. Finally, he broke the eye contact and turned back to the dishes. I'll take that as a yes, Agnes said. Don't you think Elizabeth, of all the people in the world, would want you to be happy? Do you think she enjoys watching you mope around this town all miserable and lonely? Don't bring Elizabeth into this. This is my choice, not yours and not Elizabeth's. Besides, if I hadn't married the first time, she would still be alive. After a long pause, Agnes asked softly, Is that what you believe? Oh, my dear boy, you think you killed Elizabeth? I was there, son. You didn't kill her. She died because of me. It's the same thing. And I'm not going to put another woman in danger in that way. She caught a stray bullet, William. It wasn't your bullet. You had nothing to do with it. William felt a lump in his throat. He had never talked about Elizabeth to anyone, and he was struggling now. She caught a bullet from someone I was supposed to have arrested by then. If I had been smarter or faster, he wouldn't have been there. She wasn't meant to be there anyway. Well, if you're going to assign blame for Elizabeth's death, you might as well give it to me. She was in the saloon, hunting down Hank for me when the fight broke out. William stopped washing, but he didn't look at her. It wasn't your fault. You didn't know anything dangerous was going on in town. I kept it from all of you. It wasn't your fault any more than it was Hank's. I knew what was going on, and I knew it wasn't safe to be out at night. I didn't say anything. And she died. He had said it in 20 words. It had not happened in 20 words. It had happened in the space of a summer, 5 years ago, when a man named Curtis Lowe had drifted into Deadwater Creek with a Colorado warrant on his head that William did not learn about until it was too late to matter. Lowe had money. He drank at Creed's and paid in gold and was polite to women, and William had disliked him from the first day without being able to say why. He had written to Denver. He had waited for an answer. He had told himself he needed the answer before he could act, and he had told Elizabeth nothing because he did not want her lying awake over a man who might turn out to be nobody. The answer came on a Thursday. He read it at his desk with the door open and the evening coming in blue, and it said what he had known it would say. He remembered standing up. He remembered thinking he would go to the saloon and take Lowe quietly before the place filled and that he would be home for supper. He remembered the shot. Not the first one. The first one he did not hear, or did not know he heard. It was the second, and then the third, and the sound of glass, and Creed's voice raised, and then he was running up the middle of the street with his gun in his hand, and no hat, and no clear thought in his head at all. Lowe had quarreled with a cowhand over a card. That was all it was. A card. Two men who could not shoot straight had emptied their pistols across a room, and one of the bullets had found Elizabeth, who had come in at the door not a minute before. She had come to fetch Hank home. Mother had wanted him for supper, and Hank had gone down to see the piano man, as he did most evenings, and stood outside the saloon door to listen because he would not go in. Elizabeth had gone to get him, and when she did not find him at the door, she had stepped inside to look. She was wearing the yellow dress. He had never been able to look at that shade of yellow since. Hank had been standing outside the door when they carried her out. He had run. Nobody had blamed him, and nobody had found him for 3 days, and when he came back he had not spoken for a month. Lowe went to Cheyenne in irons and hanged there in the fall. William had not gone to see it. It made no difference to anything. He had buried his wife on a Monday and put his badge back on the Tuesday, because the town needed a sheriff and there was no one else, and he had worn it every day since, like a man carrying a stone up a hill, because he had decided that was what he deserved. None of that came out of his mouth. He stood at the basin with his hands in the cooling water and said nothing at all, and his mother, who had been there, who had watched him carry Elizabeth home, let the silence be. Then she got up. "William, it wasn't your fault either." She walked across the room to stand next to her son. She put a hand on his arm. "Assigning blame is evil, William, especially when you put it on yourself. Blaming yourself, thinking about what you could have done or what you should have done to change things, is to put yourself above God and God's plans. You are not above God, William. There is no good in thinking about what might have been. You've punished yourself for too long, and it's gotten you nowhere new. Why don't you try something different? Instead of thinking about what might have been, try thinking about what could be. And that girl out there, whether you realize it or not, is your chance to get over the past and move on. It's what Elizabeth would want. And speaking as your mother, it's what I want for you. You deserve some happiness, William, and God's given you a chance at it. Snatch at it before it's gone." She turned without another word and walked to her room. William continued washing the dishes and mulling over what his mother had said. He couldn't get past the idea that he had caused Elizabeth's death, but what she had said also affected him. He was not God. He couldn't change what had happened. Was it worth ignoring Molly, the first woman he had been attracted to since Elizabeth, and sending her home? What if Agnes was right? What if Molly was God's offer of a second chance? Molly entered the house. "It's cold outside. I thought I'd grab a wrap." William had stopped washing dishes for a moment and now watched Molly as she crossed the kitchen to her room. This time he watched her, not as a temptation to resist, but as someone he might want to welcome into his life. To his surprise, he liked the idea. Chapter 10. The next day dawned bright and warm. Molly was able to sleep later than usual, mostly due to the fact that she had been up all night, thinking over all she had overheard the night before. She blushed, a little ashamed of her behavior. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop on William and Agnes's argument. She had walked away with Hank, but it was chilly, colder than the previous night had been, and she had decided to return to the house for a wrap. She had her hand on the doorknob and was about to go in when she heard Agnes ask about Elizabeth. She had frozen in place, not wanting to interrupt, and she was embarrassed to admit it to herself, curious. It made sense now. She could tell William had been attracted to her. He might not be in love with her, but he had shown enough interest to cause her to be hopeful. But now, William's heart had apparently been badly broken, maybe beyond repair. This was unfamiliar territory for Molly, and she knew she had to tread lightly. Molly was sure she and Agnes could convince a stubborn man to marry her, but she wasn't so sure about a grieving man. She wasn't sure if she wanted to convince a grieving man to marry her. She couldn't compete with a ghost and a guilty conscience. She had spent most of the night debating whether to continue with Agnes's plans or to just wait out the remaining 5 days and then leave the poor man alone. The problem with the first option was that now that she knew the reason behind William's resistance, her plans to convince William felt very unfair. She felt underhanded, trying to ingratiate herself with the town so that they would all turn against him if he didn't marry her. At first, it had been a game of sorts, trying to one-up the confirmed bachelor. But now it was complicated. The problem with the second option was that she simply did not want to go home. If she was honest with herself, there was no home to go back to. She didn't want to work in the bakery anymore, even though she liked the work. After seeing the natural beauty of the West and living in what to her was a large, sprawling house, she didn't think she could ever go back to the crowded city, with its noise, its dirty air, and its uncomfortable tenement housing. But it wasn't only that. It was also William. He was handsome, so much more so than she had ever imagined. Sometimes when he looked at her, she felt exposed in a way that should scare her and make her feel vulnerable, but actually made her feel safe. The more she was around William, the more she wanted to be around him. Finally, after hours of tossing and turning, debating between what she felt she should do and what she really wanted to do, she fell asleep. It was a fitful sleep that offered her no rest. She woke up disgruntled, in the same place she had left off. After her daily ablutions and a good breakfast, without William, she noted, she had decided it was best to do nothing for now. No scheming with Agnes today. As for leaving, well, she couldn't do that for 5 more days anyway. She decided she would visit Sally instead. William hadn't been too pleased with that idea last night, but Agnes thought it would be fine. And right now, she felt William needed some space. Molly gathered some of the leftover sweet rolls from the previous morning and a loaf of bread, also a product of yesterday's sleeplessness, and rummaged through Agnes's pantry until she found a jar of strawberry jam. She added them all to a basket and put on a straw hat. She walked outside to look for Hank in the garden, where he could usually be found, and indeed he was there. "Hank," Molly said as she approached him, "I was wondering if you would be so kind as to take me out to Lionsgate Ranch. I hate to bother you, and I would go on my own, but I did promise William not to leave again on my own." Pingth. Hank had been planting peas and looked up. "I was going to put up a trellis for my peas when I was done with this." Molly knew it was difficult for Hank to switch plans at the last minute, but she felt strongly that she should visit Sally. "I know, Hank, and I'm so sorry to interrupt your plans. What if I promise that when we get home, I will help you with the trellis so it will be built in half the time?" Hank stood erect, his posture ramrod straight, and considered this proposal for a moment. "Yes," he finally conceded, "I guess I could do that." Molly grinned. She was worried about what she would do today to stay out of William's way if Hank had not agreed. Hank left to hitch the horses to the wagon, and Molly followed. Molly never tired of seeing the scenery pass by, and the journey to Lionsgate Ranch was no exception. Spring was in full bloom. Green tufts of grass were appearing, and trees were starting to blossom. From her position next to Hank on the buckboard, she could smell the hyacinths and the lilacs that lined the yards on the way to Lionsgate. Molly had never seen these flowers, at least not outside of a book, and was fascinated. Hank loved talking about plants, so instead of the usually silent ride, Hank chatted tirelessly, pointing out flowers and newly growing plants, naming them all, and telling Molly where they grew the best. Molly listened to Hank intently and soaked in the beauty. She both loved it and hated it. It hurt her heart to think that she might have to leave in a few days. She wondered if she could try to figure out a way to stay in the town, even if she couldn't marry William. The town didn't have a bakery, so Molly knew that was always an option. But starting up a shop took a large sum of money, which she didn't have. Bakery hours were also less than desirable, especially in a one-person bakery. Her only other option was to become a saloon girl, but she felt that she hadn't reached such a low point just yet. She was certain that Agnes would not allow her to reach that point. So much of what Molly wanted for her life right now depended on William. This made her uneasy and not a little annoyed. Hank pulled into the ranch entrance and stopped the buckboard next to the front porch of the large two-story farmhouse. It was a beautiful home, Molly had to admit, with its white siding, green shingles, a red door, and a large porch with inviting rocking chairs. For a moment, Molly imagined herself and William sitting on the porch on a cool summer night, listening to the sounds of the evening. She sighed again. There was no activity outside, and the house appeared to be empty. Molly was disappointed. She was hoping for some female advice on her situation, and Agnes had too much of a vested interest in the outcome. She wanted Sally's opinion because Sally had answered an advertisement herself, and Molly felt she would understand. Molly walked up to the door, knocked, and waited, but no one answered. Molly was just about to signal to Hank that they should go home when the door creaked open. Sally peeked out from behind the door, looking wary of her visitors. "Sally?" Molly said. "Molly," Sally exclaimed. She opened the door wider to give her friend a good look, but she didn't look as excited as Molly had anticipated. "What are you doing here?" Sally asked as Molly took her into a hug. "I needed to get out of the house. Things aren't going the way I expected, and well, I needed someone to talk to. What luck that I have an old friend right here in Deadwater Creek. Besides, I've been wanting to visit you ever since I saw you in town the other day." Hank climbed the stairs and stood behind Molly. He looked unsure what to do, and Molly grabbed his arm. "Sally, you remember the sheriff's brother, Hank? Prosody Rake. This is Sally, a friend from back home." "Of course I remember." Sally held out a hand. Molly was about to say something to distract Sally since she knew that Hank probably wouldn't return the gesture, but Hank grabbed Sally's hand and gave it a brief shake. Molly looked at Hank in surprise, but he was as stoic as ever, never quite making a connection with either of them. "Won't you come in? Have a seat in the parlor, won't you? I can get you something to drink. It's warm today. It seems that winter has gone all at once." Sally turned slowly and then walked into the house. Hank walked into the parlor and sat, but Molly followed Sally. "Let me help you, Sally. It's been so long since we've had a good chat. I want to hear about everything in the last year, particularly about you and Joshua." Sally turned from the tabletop where she was fetching glasses for the delightful pitcher of lemonade that was already out on the table. "Why do you want to know about me and Joshua? There's nothing really to tell. He put in an advertisement, and I answered it, and here I am." She handed Molly a glass and then left the room to serve Hank. Molly found Sally's comments rather curious. What girl did not want to discuss her own personal love story, or lack of one? She certainly did. That was in part her reason for visiting. Sally returned from the front room and sat down at the table. Molly noticed that she eased herself down in a cautious way, but she didn't want to seem impolite by asking about it. Instead, she said, "Hank is a little uncomfortable around new people. I hope you don't mind if he sits in there, and then he'll probably get up and leave when he's inclined." "He's no bother." She sipped her lemonade, and an awkward silence descended upon the room. Finally, Molly broached the subject she was most interested in. "Sally," she started, "how did you and Joshua marry?" "I told you," Sally said with a note of impatience. "He wrote an advertisement, and I answered it. When I got here, we married. What else is there?" "Well, that's what I'm wondering. I did the same thing as you. I answered an advertisement, and here I am, but I'm having an awful hard time finishing up that last part. I guess things weren't exactly the same with me and William, though." Sally looked curious. "They weren't? What do you mean?" "Well, William wasn't exactly writing the letters to me. It was his mother, Agnes." Sally giggled, and Molly was glad to see her friend let down her guard a little. "I've heard stories about Agnes Cecil. She's a powerhouse. So did the sheriff know you were coming?" Molly told Sally the story, adding as much drama and romance as she could. It seemed to entertain Sally, who seemed to forget her worries for the moment. She was careful, though, not to mention Elizabeth, as that would have been tantamount to an invasion of William's privacy. Instead, she alluded to William having a case of cold feet. "And so, here I am, no home, no husband, and no idea what I'm going to do next." Sally sat in thought for a moment before she said, "When he became angry at his mother, what did William do?" Molly shrugged. "Nothing much, just hollered at her a little." "Did he scare you?" Not really. I got the idea that he had a temper, but it wasn't any worse than anyone else. Sally fell silent again. Finally, she said, Molly, I think the sheriff is right to be careful. You don't want to rush into anything like Joshua and I did. We were married within a day of my arrival. I thought he was dashing, and the whole situation was simply romantic. And now, well, I think these last few days were probably a good idea. She smiled again, and the mood lightened. And I do not think there is any way that a good-looking sheriff in a woman-starved town can ignore the prettiest girl in New York for very long. If this is something you really want, I think it will happen. Molly smiled, excited that Sally was so hopeful about her future. But then she paused. Are things well with you? You sound unhappy with your arrangement. Sally paused as if trying to find the right words. Joshua is not exactly what I thought he would be. He was very sweet and kind for the first week, but then he changed. I don't know what I said or did, but things were different. Sally got up, cleared their empty glasses, and reached for a tin of cookies on a high shelf. She gasped and then tried to cover it up with a cough. But Deadwater Creek is beautiful, and I do love the townspeople. So it's not all bad. Sally handed Molly the tin of cookies and again sat down carefully. I like it too, said Molly. Something was afoot that Molly didn't understand, and she didn't like it, but she wasn't sure what it could be. Sally was cautious when talking about herself, but as lively and funny as she had always been when discussing Molly. An awkward silence ensued while the women nibbled cookies and tried to think of something to say. Finally, Sally said, I wish you would have written me before you came out so I could give you some advice. Why, I did, said Molly. I wrote you a letter asking your opinion of the whole affair. You never wrote back. You did. Darn that, Joshua, I never got the letter. Sally looked about to cry. Well, never mind, said Molly hastily. I'm sure it just got lost in the mail. What would you have told me? Sally looked at Molly. There's nothing really to say now that you're here. She paused. Like I said, I've heard the sheriff is a good man, and I have no reason to doubt him. But be careful, Molly. Be sure he doesn't. She paused and looked out the window, then continued. Do anything surprising when he gets angry, and if he does, you don't marry him. This conversation had become most odd. Molly set down her cookie and glanced toward the parlor and Hank before raising her voice conversationally to say, Sally, your spring lilacs are so lovely. The sheriff doesn't have any. Do you think we could possibly get a start? Sally looked confused but nodded her head. Wonderful. Molly walked to the doorway separating the parlor and the kitchen. Hank, could you be a dear and dig up a start of Sally's lilacs? I would love one at home. Hank got up without a word and went outside. Molly turned to Sally and said urgently, Sally, what is going on? Are you not well? Sally's eyes widened, and then they filled with tears. Yes, I'm fine, she said, but the tears coursing down her cheeks suggested otherwise. Molly sat back down at the table and grabbed her friend's hand. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Sally's caution, both in words and movements. Her small cry when she reached for the cookie tin. Her strange warnings, even after all the good things Molly had said about William. Sally, is Joshua hurting you? Sally nodded, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Sally, you've got to get away. Right now, today. Where is Joshua right now? You can't stay here. Sally brushed her tears away. He's out on the ranch or in the barn. He's due to be home soon. In fact, you're going to have to leave. If he finds out that you were here and what I've told you, I might get into trouble. What about you? You can leave too, Sally. You can't stay here. Where am I to go? And besides, he'll find me. I know he will. He'll kill me if I try to leave. He's told me as much. You can stay with us. Molly was practically shouting. I'm sure the sheriff won't mind, and he wouldn't dare come for you at the sheriff's house. Sally paused for a moment, as if considering the offer. Please, Sally, Molly pleaded quietly. Sally finally shook her head. I can't, Molly, no matter how much I want to. I think I'm going to have a baby. She put her head in her hands and started sobbing. Molly put her arms around her friend and spoke words of intended comfort that, in reality, sounded hollow. Molly didn't know the words to make this better. There were none. Finally, Sally quieted her sobs and sat up. She straightened her back and smoothed her hair. You need to go. Joshua will be angry if you're here when he gets back, and, well, things are not so bad if I can keep him from getting angry." Molly didn't know what to say. All she could do was gather her belongings and walk past the lovely parlor and out onto the beautiful front porch. Sally walked her out to the buckboard where Hank was waiting with a lilac start wrapped in paper. Before Molly climbed up beside Hank, she gave her friend one last hug and said in her ear, "Please come to the sheriff's house. If not today, then next time. Get away from him." Tears welled in Sally's eyes again, and she shook her head slightly. "I made my choice. It was a foolish one, but I still made it. And Joshua isn't all bad. He does feel sorry afterward. Be careful, Molly." She turned and went back into the house. Hank slapped the reins and the buckboard moved away. They remained silent for a time before Molly burst out. "Hank, what did you mean when you said that Joshua Duster was a mean man? What did he do?" "He kicked a dog," Hank said in his straightforward monotone. "I have a feeling that's not all he's ever kicked." Chapter 11. William kept the appointment. He told himself it was because Bill Crowley would talk if he didn't, which was true, and not because Molly had made it, which was also true. Bill's shop was full at 11. It was always full at 11. 3 old men who had not needed a haircut in a decade sat along the wall for the conversation, and Bill stood behind his chair with a towel over his shoulder and a look on his face like a cat that has found the cream. "Sheriff," he said, "right on time. Your young lady said you'd be punctual." "She isn't my young lady, Bill." "Course not." Bill snapped the cloth around William's neck. "Sit back." The old men along the wall said nothing, which was worse than anything they could have said. William sat back. The razor came out and the strop, and for a while there was nothing but the sound of the blade going back and forth on the leather. "Pretty little thing," Bill remarked to the ceiling. "Red hair. My wife's mother had red hair. Temper on her like a scalded cat, but she could bake. Your Miss Ryan bake?" "She isn't my—" William stopped because Bill had the razor at his throat and was smiling. "Yes, she bakes." "Thought so. Creed said she brought his girls a plate of something yesterday. Creed says he'll marry her himself if you don't." The razor went down one cheek, smooth and cold. "Whole town's waiting on you, Sheriff, just so you know. Ed Miller's got $2 on the wedding being inside a month." "Ed Miller," said William through his teeth, "can mind his own affairs." "He can't, though. That's the beauty of a small town." Bill wiped the blade. "Now hold still, or I'll take an ear off and your young lady will never forgive me." William held still. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the way she had turned around in the general store yesterday and asked him if everything was fine, cool as you please, when she knew perfectly well he had been staring at her like a fool. He thought about the small of her back under his hand in the dark. Then he made himself stop thinking about it, because Bill was watching him in the mirror. "Say," said one of the old men from the wall, as though the thought had just come to him. "You hear about the bottles up at the Dutchman's?" William turned his head and Bill hissed and pulled the razor away. "What bottles?" "Elmer Pratt was up there Sunday looking for a stray. Says the old cabin's been used. Fire ring, blankets, and a whole heap of empty bottles chucked in the gully. Not saloon bottles. Some other kind, no label on 'em." The old man scratched his jaw. "Same as them ones the drovers had in the spring when they tore up the livery. Remember? Nobody could figure where they got liquored up, seeing as Creed swore he never served them." William did remember. He had put it down to a bottle brought in from Cheyenne. "Anybody see who's been using the cabin?" "Nope. Elmer said there was wagon tracks, though, coming and going." Bill finished the shave in silence, which for Bill was a considerable feat, and toweled William's face and stood back to admire his work. In the mirror, William saw a man who looked younger than he felt, with a clean jaw and hair cut close, and he did not know quite what to make of him. "There," said Bill, "fit to be married. That'll be 2 bits, and I'll not charge you for the advice." William paid him. At the door he stopped. "Bill, if anybody else comes in talking about bottles or that cabin, you send them to me. Quiet like." "Quiet like," Bill agreed, in a voice the whole shop could hear. William walked back down the boardwalk in the noon sun with his hat in his hand, because his neck was still damp, and turned the thing over. Bottles with no label. Wagon tracks. Drovers drunk on liquor, nobody had sold them. Somebody in this county was making whiskey and selling it on the sly, and had been for a season at least, and he had not seen it because he had been busy not seeing a good many things. He did not like that thought. He put it with the others he did not like, and went in and sat down at his desk to make some notes, and that was where he was when Molly came in. When they got home, Molly instructed Hank to go inside the house using the side entrance while Molly went to the sheriff's office. She wanted to see William. He looked up as soon as Molly walked in the door. William noticed that Molly's eyes were bright green and blazing, which meant she was furious. He also noticed her face was flushed and her lips red, which made him wonder for the 100th time today what it might be like to kiss her, but he forced himself to focus. "Molly, are you well?" "William, I want you to go right over to Joshua Duster's ranch and arrest that man." She stood with her hands on her hips and looked at him expectantly. "For what?" "I can't just go and arrest men because they're unpleasant. He must break the law in some way." He knew she was upset, but she was so appealing right now. She was like a stick of dynamite, and her fury made her all the more attractive to him. He tried not to smile, for fear she would take her wrath out on him. She looked exasperated. "What is he doing? He's hitting his wife. He needs to be arrested right now, William. Why are you just sitting there? Don't you care that an innocent woman is being beaten, probably routinely, by her husband? Go get him." William set his pen down. He was no longer amused by Molly's anger. He stood up slowly. "How do you know this?" "I was just over at their ranch, and she could barely stand up straight from the pain. I flat out asked her if he hit her." "What did she say?" William was pacing the floor now. "She didn't say no. You need to get that man away from her before he kills her. And it may not only be her who is in danger, William. She suspects she may be carrying that dastardly Duster's baby." Molly was raging now. The hair about her face had fallen free of her hairpins and was hanging wildly on her face. William stopped to face Molly and said with regret, "I can't do anything, Molly." Molly stared back, her eyes wide and her mouth open in shock. "What do you mean you can't do anything?" "Of course you can. You're the sheriff. Go over there and arrest him, or shoot him. I don't care which." She crossed her arms in front of her chest now and glared at William. "Molly, I wish I could. I wish I could hang any man who hurts a woman from the nearest tree, but I can't." He stepped forward and put his hands on her shoulders to make her look at him. "Out here, the law gives me almost nothing to stand on when it's a man and his own wife, inside his own house. Unless Sally will swear out a complaint against him, or somebody sees him do it, there isn't a judge in the territory who will hold him on my say-so, and she hasn't said one word to me." He could tell immediately that this was the wrong thing to say. "Oh, really? Is that what you think? Is that what all you men who send away for wives think? That you can just lure innocent girls away from their homes with pretty stories of love and marriage, and then be incredibly handsome and charming, and then reject them or hit them?" "Now, wait just 1 second," William said, his voice on edge. "That is entirely unfair. Just because I have some hesitations about marrying the woman my mother proposed to does not put me in the same category as the likes of Joshua Duster." He expected Molly to argue with him, or even throw further accusations, and he was ready for a fight. What she did instead was fall against his chest and cry pitifully for her friend. His anger melted away, and he was at a loss for what to do. Instinct took over, and he put his arms around her and held her while she cried. Holding her, he couldn't help but consider what Molly had just said in her outburst. She thought he was handsome and charming. Focus. William was smart enough to realize that this outburst was not about him, but rather the treatment of her friend by that low-down snake, Joshua Duster. But it was nice to know that the attraction was mutual. Finally, Molly's tears abated, but she kept her head on his chest while she shuddered in the aftermath of her outpouring of emotion. Finally, she pulled away and wiped her eyes on the handkerchief she had produced from somewhere. "You're right. It was wrong of me to group you with him. You have been nothing but kind to me and a true gentleman, so I apologize. But William, is there really nothing you can do?" she whimpered. Her expression squeezed William's heart. He wanted desperately to assure her that he would gallop out there immediately and slay the dragon that was Joshua Duster, just for her. But the level-headed, logical sheriff side of his brain knew he couldn't. Not until I have something a judge will hold him on, darling. But I promise you, the moment I do, I'll lock him up. That might not be soon enough. William, she was terrified. She said he's threatened to kill her if she ever left. William racked his brain for a legal means to keep Duster away from his wife. William put his finger under Molly's chin and lifted her face until she was looking at him. She had tears clinging to her eyelashes and dotting her cheeks. He brushed one away with his thumb and allowed his hand to cup her face. She was so beautiful. Tell you what, I'll go out there tomorrow and see what's going on. And then I'll keep an eye on him day and night. The moment he gives me cause, I'll haul him in and lock him up for as long as I can. Okay? In the meantime, you keep working on her. Try to get her to leave before he can hit her again. Joshua Duster has been hitting Sally? William and Molly whirled around to see Hank standing in the doorway to their home. Molly and William didn't move fast enough, and before they could say anything, Hank had turned and gone out the side door. Molly and William followed him, calling for him to stop. "What in the world is going on?" called Agnes, emerging from her room. "What is all this racket?" "Hank," William said. "He's overheard something that upset him, and now he's gone." Agnes looked panicked and started to move toward the door leading outside. Suddenly she stopped and cried out. She doubled over and was unable to move. Chapter 12. "Ma!" William cried. He pivoted and went to his mother. "Agnes!" Molly exclaimed at the same time as William. She followed William, and together they helped her into a chair. "No matter," said Agnes, and she tried to shoo William away. "Agnes, you're not well. Let us help you," Molly said gently. Agnes's breath was quick and shallow. Molly looked at William and saw that he had turned pale. "Ma, what's going on?" She smiled weakly. "You haven't called me Ma in years." She winced again and groaned. Molly could tell that William was starting to panic, so she took over. "Agnes, we need to get you in bed." "No, Hank," she protested feebly. "Hank will be okay for a minute," said William as he scooped her up in a single motion and carried her to her bed. Molly instructed William to put Agnes into her bed and then told him to leave. She helped Agnes change into her nightdress, the effort of which made Agnes pant and wince in pain. Once she was in her bed, she motioned for Molly to sit down. "Agnes, are you in pain? Is there anything I can do?" "Molly, dear," Agnes said. She was still breathing hard, but the pain seemed to be less. "It's my old heart. It's giving out." Molly held the old woman's hand and was carried back in memory to sitting beside her own grandmother less than a year before, in similar circumstances. No, she thought. Not Agnes, too. "I'm sure it's not that serious," Molly said, trying for a hopeful tone. "Oh, it is," Agnes said in the casual way she said everything. "The doctor informed me about 10 months ago that it was just a matter of time. He said a year at the most." "Oh, Agnes, does William know?" "No. He has enough to handle without worrying about me. That's why I put the advertisement in the paper, you know. I want to see my boys taken care of. I hope you forgive me for that." "Of course, you didn't even need to ask. What do I tell William?" "Nothing about this, but I think he knows anyway. This isn't the first spell I've had, but I must admit it is the worst." She paused a moment as if considering something. "Molly, could you please go over to my bureau? There's a book there. Bring it to me." Molly rummaged through the bureau drawer until she found a book bound in brown leather. She brought it over to Agnes and handed it to her. "I want you to have this book, Molly." She caressed the cover, and Molly knew that this book was a prized possession. Molly began to protest, but Agnes held up a hand to silence her. "No, I want you to have this book, but you must promise me something, my dear girl. You must promise not to read it until you and William are married." "Oh, Agnes, there's no guarantee he will, and you will. Trust me, I know my son. Good sense will win out, but you must promise." Molly nodded, and Agnes handed over the book. "Now, I think I'll sleep a little while if it's all the same to you. Tell William it's indigestion. I'll be better tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere until I see him married." Agnes's eyes drifted closed, and her breathing slowed and became regular. Molly got up and left the room to find William pacing the sitting room. He looked up as soon as he heard Molly. Is she any better? Molly hated to lie to William, but she didn't want to disobey Agnes either. I think so. She says she has indigestion, and she thinks it will pass. William sighed and sank into the nearest chair. She's done this before, you know. She keeps calling it indigestion, but I'm worried it's worse than just that. He rested his elbows on his knees, lowered his head, and massaged his brow with his hands. In prosody, Molly didn't want to confirm his worries, but neither did she want to lie. Instead, she walked over to him and put her hand on his shoulder. He lifted his hand and rested it on top of hers. Molly didn't want to break the moment, but there was another emergency at hand. William, she said softly. Hank. Hank. William stood quickly, and Molly dropped her hand, but William grabbed it and held on tight. Where would he have gone? Molly asked. The garden? Together, they headed toward the door, William's hand still firmly around Molly's. They walked together to the edge of Hank's garden, even though they knew the moment they left the door that he wasn't there. I think I know where he is, William said, but I don't dare leave Mother. Go, said Molly. I'll look after Agnes. But hurry, William. It's getting late. I know, said William. He looked down at their clasped hands and then into her eyes. Reluctantly, he let go of her hand and hurried away. William made his way to the saloon. Hank only ventured to 2 places when he was upset, and this was the one. William walked in and eased up to the bar. He looked around for Hank. You want something, Sheriff? Asked the bartender, an old bent-over man named Creed. Nothing right now, Creed. I'm looking for my brother. He got upset and took off. You seen him? Not today, Sheriff. You worried about him? A little. He is just not usually this upset. You know, Hank. You let me know if he comes in, will ya? Sure thing, Sheriff. You tell that little woman of yours she's welcome here anytime she wants to bring her goods. She brought over some sweet rolls the other day. Said she thought me and my girls might like a treat. William raised his eyebrows. She did? Is there a place in this town she hasn't been yet? You've got yourself a nice lady, Sheriff. You done real good on that Creed began polishing glasses and putting them up on the shelf behind him. William was getting ready to give his standard protest, that Molly wasn't his lady, but the protest died before it began. He no longer felt any desire to protest. Instead, he felt a sense of pride in what Creed had said. As William was walking out of the saloon, Joshua Duster walked in, reeling and already drunk. He slammed into William's shoulder with his own. Watch it, Duster, warned William. He tried to remain friendly with most of the townspeople, but he struggled when it came to Joshua Duster. Before today, William simply didn't like the man. But now, if what Molly told him was true, he despised the man. Duster turned around and squinted at the sheriff. What do you mean, watch it? Looks like you're the one who ran into me. William decided the best course of action would be to ignore the belligerent drunk and hope he drank himself to death. Hey, said Duster. I was talking to you, Sheriff. I said you ran into me, and I reckon I would like an apology. Well, said William against his better judgment, good luck on that. He headed for the door to leave. You're not better than me, William Cecil. That's right, Duster called to William's back. I know what you've done. You've gone and ordered you a bride, just like I did. Well, let me tell you, that was a mistake. William turned slowly. Joshua was treading on thin ice, mentioning Molly. That's right, Sheriff, sneered Duster. Go back home to that whore you sent away for. Something snapped inside William. Without knowing what he was doing, he yanked Duster away from the bar and hit him as hard as he could. Duster swung back and managed a good one, landing a fist in William's eye. William came back again, this time connecting with Duster's nose. Duster, already unsteady from drink, was unable to keep his balance and reeled backward into the bar, which had been quickly cleared of customers as soon as the fight broke out. William took advantage of Duster's position, grabbed him by his collar, and forced him to stand upright. I don't know what is going on with you, Duster, William spat, but you just insulted the sheriff's lady. I'm taking you in for drunk and disorderly conduct. You're coming with me. William partly dragged the bumbling Joshua Duster across the street to the cells. Joshua was making enough racket to wake the dead, but William paid him no attention. William flung the door to the office open with a loud crash and pushed the man into one of the jail cells, locking the cell door behind Duster. "You can stay there until you're sober," William barked. He turned and walked down the hallway to the door to his home. He pounded on the door. He knew he should walk around back when he had someone locked up, but it was late, his brother was missing, his mother was sick, there was a gash on his nose, and his eye was swelling up fast. He just wanted to get home. The door opened, and Molly cried, "Oh, good Lord, William!" Chapter 13. "It's nothing," William said, walking past Molly. "What do you mean, nothing? You're bleeding, and your eye is swollen shut. What in the world happened? Did you find Hank?" She rushed after him and started rummaging through Agnes's medical supplies. "I'm fine, Molly, and no, I have no idea where he could be." William walked over to the basin and began pumping the lever. He ran his hands under the cold water, giving his sore knuckles relief, and then pumped some more. Molly rushed to his side and shoved a pot under the running water. "Here," she said, taking his hand from the pump handle and lowering his knuckles into the pot. His eyes closed as the pain numbed. She, too, plunged her hand into the water, wetting the towel in her hand. She pulled it out and said, "Put this on your eye for the swelling." She turned to him and reached for his face with the towel. William froze. A woman hadn't touched him in a long while, and he wasn't ready for her to be this close. It turned out he didn't have a choice. Molly put the cold towel on his eye, and he groaned with relief. "There," she said softly. "Is that better?" William opened his good eye and studied her concerned face as she dabbed his eye. "It's really not a big deal, Molly. I've been hit before. Just never by that no-good Joshua Duster, but a black eye's a black eye." "Well, you've never been hit when I was here, so it is a very big deal to me." She dabbed again, and he winced at her touch. "I'm sorry. Did I push too hard? Would it be better if you held it?" she asked softly. "No," William said huskily. "You're doing great." William realized how close he was to her then. He was taller than her by a good measure, so she had to reach for his eye. As a result, she was pressed up against him. He could feel the curve of her against his chest, and he remembered the argument his mother had made the night before. Was it time to move on? Molly's eyes were full of compassion, and he realized just how tired he was. Tired of missing Elizabeth, tired of carrying the burden of her death, tired of resisting the attraction he felt for Molly. He wanted something different. Slowly, William reached up and took the towel from Molly's hand. He couldn't see well, and he knew he must look awful, but he didn't care. His mother had warned him not to let another moment pass. He didn't intend to. William's good hand touched her cheek, and Molly's eyes drifted closed. She turned her head into his hand until her lips touched his palm, and she gently kissed it. He pulled his other hand from the water and dropped it to her waist to pull her close. He lowered his head until their lips met. His kiss was soft and hesitant at first, but when Molly parted her lips in acceptance, he pulled her closer, and their kiss deepened. William's hand wandered from her face and tangled in her hair. He became lost in her and could think of nothing but Molly, her lips, her breath, her body against his. He kissed her again and then again, his passion and need increasing. A moan escaped her lips, and William muffled it with yet another kiss. Finally, Molly broke away, and William rested his forehead against hers, trying to catch his breath. Molly pulled free. "I'll get the witch hazel," she breathed, "so I can tend to your cuts and bruises." He watched as she walked away, wondering what he had just done and why he hadn't done it earlier. He grabbed the basin and sat at the table. He was soaking his knuckles again when Molly came back into the room with the witch hazel in one hand and fresh cloths in the other. She approached him, and besides the color in her cheeks, there was no hint of what had happened between them. "Did you say Joshua Duster did this?" she asked as she dabbed medicine on the cut across the bridge of his nose. "Yeah." "Does that mean he's spending the night in a jail cell?" "Good. That means Sally is safe. For tonight, anyway." She took his hand out of the basin and gently dried it with her towel. He closed his eyes briefly, enjoying her touch. She dabbed the witch hazel on his bruised knuckles. Finally, he was able to ask, "How's Mother?" "She's better, I think. She's been asleep since you left, but her breathing hasn't changed any. You didn't find Hank? He shook his head. No, and I don't know where else I can look tonight. What do we do? I don't know, he sighed. Hank has done this once before. We looked everywhere and couldn't find him. He eventually showed up 3 days later. We still don't know where he went. When? William didn't answer. When Elizabeth died? She ventured. William was silent for a moment and then gave a quick nod. Did Mother tell you about her? No, she admitted. I came back last night for my rap and I heard you talking. I'm so sorry for everything, for your loss, for overhearing your conversation, for being here, for reminding you. Don't, William interjected. Don't be sorry for being here. Molly put the witch hazel on the table and then sat in the chair next to William. She touched his arm. What do we do? Molly whispered. About Hank or about us? Both, she said with a chuckle. I don't know. Wait, I guess. William covered her hand with his own. For a while, neither of them spoke. The lamp hissed. Somewhere out in the dark, a dog barked twice and gave it up. Can I ask you something? William said. Suppose Mother had got her way and you'd been here a month before we settled anything. What would you have done with yourself? Molly considered it. Baked, she said. Sold bread out of your mother's kitchen door until I had enough put by for a shop. There isn't a bakery in this town, William. I noticed that before I noticed the mountains. She smiled. Almost before. A shop of your own, with my name over the door. No. She shook her head. Graham's name. She never had one thing in this world with her name on it. She looked down at their hands. That's what I want, if you want to know. Not just to get away from New York, to make something. And to hear myself pray at night without somebody thumping on the other side of the wall. William was quiet a moment. I wanted to farm, he said. Before Pa died, I had a piece of bottom land picked out and everything. Then the town needed somebody with a steady hand, and Mother needed the wage, and Hank needed. He shrugged. Hank. So I took the badge. I don't regret it, but I still know exactly where that bottom land is. Do you ever go and look at it? Every spring. He smiled a little, as if he had been caught at something. Don't tell Mother. I'll add it to the list. Molly tilted her head. Can I say something you won't like? You will anyway. You told me not to walk about town alone. William, I walked the streets of New York at 4 a.m. for 6 years to get the ovens lit. I can look after myself. New York didn't have Joshua Duster. New York had 100 of him. She held his eye. I'll take Hank because you asked me to, not because I need to. He laughed then low so as not to wake his mother. Mother picked better than she knew. She left a good deal out of those letters. Molly's smile faded. Do you pray, William? I used to. He looked at the lamp. I haven't said much to God these 5 years. I don't know that he's been listening. Prosody Wren. Graham used to say he knows what you need before you ask him. She squeezed his hand. Maybe he has only been waiting for you to ask. They sat like this for some time. William wanted to kiss her again, but he didn't dare. Before tonight, it had been 5 years since he had kissed or even touched a woman. He wasn't sure he trusted himself. Finally, he stood and did as much as he dared. He kissed the top of her head. Go to bed, Molly. I'll wait up for Hank and keep an eye on Mother. Molly nodded and headed to her room. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it. She touched her lips where only an hour ago William's lips had been. She had been kissed once or twice by the few beaux she'd had before Graham fell ill, but never like that. A kiss had never made her dizzy and left her body aching. What she felt for William thrilled her and frightened her all at once. Molly pulled the book Agnes had given her from her apron pocket and put it in her bureau drawer. She splashed her face with water, dressed in her nightgown, and brushed her hair, her normal nighttime routine, without a second thought. But tonight was different. For the first time, she was aware of the way her face felt when she washed it. The bones and the structure were new to her. Putting on her nightgown, she felt the light, flimsy fabric wash across her face, neck, arms, abdomen, and legs, and felt the hem as it skimmed her toes when she moved. When she brushed her hair, it felt foreign to her, soft and silky. William's kiss had awakened her body, and for the first time she was truly alive. She lay down and prepared to spend the rest of the night wide awake, intensely aware of the man on the other side of the door. Chapter 14. The next morning, as soon as she dressed, Molly went to Agnes's room to check on her. She was relieved to see the older woman sitting up in her bed, a crochet hook and yarn in her hand. "Hello," Agnes greeted Molly. "Came to see if I was dead?" "Not exactly, but I am certainly glad to find you alive. Did William get your crochet work for you?" Molly asked casually. She was desperate to know if William had spoken to his mother about her. "Yes, he was in here earlier, but he shouldn't have bothered. I haven't wanted to make a stitch. And no, he hasn't said anything about you." She smiled weakly at the expression on Molly's face. "It's written all over your face, dear. He didn't mention you, but he tried so hard not to mention you that he would have said less if he were shouting. He asked me to let you know that he was in his office." She raised her eyebrow at this. "Apparently, he needs to discuss a prisoner with you. I assume the prisoner had something to do with the state of his face this morning. He said if he's not there, he'll leave you a note. Seems like you all had an eventful night." "Has Hank come home yet?" Molly asked, ignoring Agnes's last comment. Agnes swallowed as though she was trying to control her emotions, and indeed her voice sounded choked when she spoke again. "No, but I'm sure he'll find his way back. He always does. And William is going to look for him today." Molly busied herself tending to Agnes. She made her breakfast, got her extra pillows, and anything else she could think of until Agnes shooed her away. "For goodness sake," she said irritably. "I'm grateful to you, but I just want to rest. Why don't you go to the office? William said he wanted you to come over and help him with a prisoner. I don't know what he expects you to do, but that's none of my never mind." "Are you sure, Agnes? I hate to leave you." "I'm going to sleep, dear. There will be nothing to do. I'll be fine." Agnes, true to her word, closed her eyes. Molly didn't leave until she was sure Agnes was asleep, and then she dawdled a while. She was unsure how to feel. He had kissed her last night as if he wanted her, but she remembered his assertion that he didn't want to marry, and she understood his reasons. One kiss did not necessarily mean that anything had changed. She was afraid to let herself indulge in the idea that he might marry her. It would hurt too much if he didn't. Finally, with Agnes sound asleep and nothing else to do, Molly unlocked the door to the sheriff's office and went in. William was not at his desk. She was both relieved and disappointed. She wanted more than anything to see William again, but with the confusion, she didn't know what to expect. The jail cell was empty too. She hated that man, and she wanted nothing more than to see him locked up, but she knew William couldn't hold Joshua Duster for long on a night's drunkenness. He could hold him long enough to sober up, and then he had to let him go. She went over to William's desk, looking for the note Agnes had told her would be there. "Molly, I've gone to look for Hank. Please look after Mother. Keep Hank here if he comes home. W." She felt a little silly. All those nerves and all that build-up for nothing. What did she expect? A love letter? Not while William's brother was missing, she knew. She was about to go back to the house for a nap, being very tired after 2 restless nights, when she heard thundering horse hooves and the clatter of a buckboard careening down the street, stopping right in front of the office. She rushed to the door and flung it open. "Hank," she exclaimed as soon as she recognized the driver. Hank's usual emotionless face looked panicked and scared. "Steady, where have you been?" "What's this?" "Sally is in trouble," he said. He spoke faster than usual, although still in his characteristic monotone. This, more than anything, worried Molly. Molly didn't ask questions. She didn't think about Agnes or William's instructions to keep Hank home. Her only worry was Sally and what Joshua might do after a long, drunken night in a jail cell. She climbed into the buckboard, and without a word, Hank slapped the reins harder than usual, and the horses took off again. The ride to Lionsgate Ranch was reckless and bumpy. Hank didn't say anything, but the manner in which he steered the horses indicated that something very bad had happened to Sally. Finally, the horses came to a stop in a cloud of dust. Molly jumped off the buckboard as best she could and rushed into the house. "Sally!" she called. She looked in the parlor, where she had sat only yesterday sipping lemonade, but Sally was not there. She wasn't in the kitchen or the bathroom. "Sally!" she called again, and she thought she heard a groan. Hank charged into the house behind her and, motioning upward, said, "Upstairs." They both ran up the stairs, Molly in the lead. She could hear Hank's heavy breathing behind her, and she was glad she had someone to help her. "Sally," she called again. Again, she heard a noise. This time it sounded like soft crying coming from the direction of a bedroom. Molly ran in that direction and stopped in her tracks. Sally was sitting on the floor against a wall, under a broken window. Shards of glass lay around her, and her eye was bruised worse than William's had been the night before. She had a gash on her head and a split lip. She could barely move, but when she saw Molly and Hank in the doorway, she started crying. She tried to talk, but her swollen lip made it impossible to decipher. Molly rushed to her friend's side. "It's going to be fine, Sally. I'm here. I don't care what you say. I'm taking you home. Hank, grab some of those blankets off the bed and come here." Sally grabbed Molly's arm. She was struggling to speak, and Molly put her ear next to Sally's lips. "My baby," she whispered just before she lost consciousness. Molly looked down and for the first time noticed the blood pooling beneath Sally, soaking Sally's skirts. Oh, good Lord. "Hank, she needs a doctor." Molly wasn't sure what to do now. She wasn't sure it was safe for Sally to travel, but the alternative was to leave Sally here, and that she simply would not do. She might die from blood loss. "Dear God, don't let her die," Molly said aloud as she supported her friend's lolling head. "Hank," she barked. "Change of plans. Grab that mattress off the bed and put it in the buckboard. Fast. I have no idea where Joshua is, but I have a feeling he won't take kindly to us stealing his mattress or his wife, then come straight back here." Hank obeyed her orders without hesitating. He grabbed the mattress with next to no effort. Thank God for Hank Cecil, thought Molly. He was strong, and he wasted no time on questions. She carefully placed Sally's head against the wall to grab whatever clothes she could find and stuff them into a pillowcase. By that time, Hank was back, waiting for orders. "Good, grab some of those blankets." She pointed to the discarded bedclothes. "You're going to need them. She's bleeding a lot. Now, Hank, come here. Can you pick her up?" Molly stood back for Hank to scoop Sally up. "Good. Take her out to the wagon and lay her on the mattress. Careful, Hank. I don't want to hurt her more than she already is. Watch her head," she said as she followed Hank out the door and down the stairs, the pillowcase in hand. Percent. Hank made good time to the buckboard, and with great gentleness, he lowered Sally onto the mattress. Molly had grabbed a quilt from another room before following him down the stairs, and she handed it to Hank to tuck her in. Once Sally was situated, Hank climbed onto the front of the buckboard and picked up the reins. Molly was about to climb into the wagon herself when she heard a gunshot. She whirled around to see Joshua running from his barn, gun in hand, pointing it at her. She put her hands in the air as a sign of surrender, but looked at Hank and said urgently, "Hank, take her to the doctor first, and then go get William. Go now." She slapped the rump of one of the horses for good measure, and the buckboard started moving. "Stop," yelled Joshua, but it was too late. Hank was on the road, but that didn't stop Joshua. He stopped and took aim again. Molly hit the ground just before the shot sounded, and she heard a bullet whiz over her head. Molly heard Joshua approaching. He grabbed her by the arm and yanked her to her feet. "Who are you?" He shook her by the arm until her teeth rattled. "I'm Molly," she finally answered. He stopped and peered at her. An evil smile spread across his face. "I know you. You're the sheriff's whore. My. You sure are a pretty thing, ain't ya?" He pulled her to him until they were nose to nose. "Tell you what, Molly." He said her name like he was rolling it around his mouth, and it made Molly want to gag. She could smell alcohol on his breath and the sour smell of a man who had spent the night in jail. "You lost me my wife. The way I figure it, you owe me another one. And since the sheriff doesn't seem too keen on having you, I don't think he'll mind if I borrow ya." Molly knew she should be frightened by Duster's suggestions, but she was angered instead. "You are disgusting," she retorted, spitting in his eye. She had just enough time to marvel at her great aim before Joshua hit her on the temple with the butt of his gun. William was angry. William had spent the morning combing the town for Hank and was frustrated to begin with. When he got home to check on Molly and his mother, Molly was nowhere to be found. William rushed into Agnes's room and breathed a sigh of relief to see his mother asleep, her chest still rising and falling, albeit slowly. Why in the world would Molly leave his mother alone on a day like today? He felt as if steam might be coming off his face. He was so mad. "William?" his mother said softly. "I'm here, mother," he replied, trying to control his anger. "I thought that might be you. Come here, my boy." William grabbed a chair standing off to the side and dragged it closer to his mother's bedside. He sat close and took her hand. She looked worse, and he forgot his anger. "You don't have indigestion, do you, mother?" She smiled weakly. "You always were smart." "No, I don't. I don't have much more time, William, so I need you to listen closely to me. That girl, she's good for you, William. Don't be a fool. Don't let her leave here. Marry her. She loves you, and she'll be good to Hank. And don't be angry that she's not here right now. She has a good reason." William's eyes started to fill with tears. He didn't cry often, and he didn't want to do it now, but he couldn't help himself. "Why didn't you tell me, Ma? I could have fetched you a doctor." She barely shook her head. "I got a doctor myself, and he told me there was nothing he could do, but I realized there was something I could do. For my sons, both of you, I couldn't leave you alone, so I put an advertisement in the paper. I know you're angry with me, William, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry I found Molly. The Lord knows what you need before you do. He's giving you a second chance at happiness, William. Please, for me, for yourself, take it." William didn't say anything but nodded his head. "You're a good boy. Take care of Hank." "You know I will, Mother." "Yes, I do." She lifted a hand to his cheek for a moment and then dropped it back on the sheets. "I'm tired now. I want to see Hank when he gets home. Make sure he comes in." Again, William nodded. Agnes closed her eyes and went back to sleep. He got up, wiped the tears off his cheeks, and tried to compose himself. He would tell Hank to see her if he could find him. William left Agnes's room and eased the door shut. Suddenly, Hank burst into the room, opening the door with such force that it hit the wall and swung wildly. "Hank, where have you been? Mother is sick, and you disappeared. Molly, hurry!" And with that, he turned and ran back out the door. William was immediately alarmed. Hank never moved quickly, and he was practically running now. William followed him out the door. He saw the mattress in the buckboard covered with blood. "Molly," he whispered, panic entering his heart. "Molly," he said louder and with fire under it. "Hank, where is she?" "She's at Sally's ranch. She made me bring Sally to the doctor, but he's got Molly." William swore. "Sally's ranch? That's Lionsgate, right? Duster's place?" Hank nodded and started to climb into the buckboard. "No, Hank, you stay here. These horses are too tired to go out there again. Take them out and get 'em rested, then go see Mother. Sit with her until I get back. I'll go get Molly." He ran to the barn and saddled his horse. It would be faster than the wagon. He swung into the saddle and urged the horse into a canter. He rode hard all 2 miles to Lionsgate, fear rising in his chest every time he thought about what might happen to her. Not again, he thought over and over. If he had just kept Duster locked up another day, he urged the horse to gallop faster. He couldn't lose another woman to his mistakes as sheriff. He wouldn't. Dear God, he prayed as he rode, let me get there in time. He finally reached Lionsgate Ranch and slowed the horse, taking in the property. He saw the house and a barn, but where was she? Chapter 15. Slowly, Molly opened her eyes, but she couldn't focus. Her head was throbbing, and the light, even the dim light of the room, made it ache worse. Something was dripping into her eyes, and she tried to wipe it away, but she couldn't move her hands. Why could she not move her hands? She closed her eyes and opened them again, trying to focus on her wrists. Shapes formed, and she realized that she was tied to the chair on which she was sitting. She began to panic. Where was she? Slowly, the events of the day started to come back to her. Hank saying that Sally was in trouble, the rush to the house and finding Sally on the floor. Duster catching her just as Hank drove off with Sally. That snake. He must have knocked her out and then tied her up, hands and feet bound to the chair. She also had an old bandana around her mouth. She started to struggle, to check for any weak spots in the ties that held her. "It's no good," said Duster. She hadn't noticed him sitting across from her on a bale of hay, drinking from a bottle. He looked very drunk. "Took you long enough to wake up. I got bored, so I had a drink. And then another one. You sure like making men wait, don't ya? Molly stared at him with big eyes. She had to get out of this. But how? She kicked again, feeling the tether relax a little around her right ankle. She began to pull at the tie as best she could under her long skirts, praying that he didn't notice. I must admit, I never did understand the sheriff. He sent away for a bride, a pretty one at that, and then doesn't want to marry her. Why not, you stingy? He got closer, and Molly could smell his sour breath again. She continued to work surreptitiously at the tie, and finally, she felt it loosen a little more. You don't look stingy to me, he continued. Maybe I can try to find out why the sheriff changed his mind. He bent over and rested his hands on his knees so he was looking straight at her. He removed the bandana, but before Molly could yell or scream, Joshua forced his mouth on hers, hard enough to bruise her lips. She yanked her right foot hard in surprise, and it came loose. She began to gag on his breath, and he pulled away, leering horribly. Molly didn't waste another moment, bringing her right knee up hard and fast into his groin. He groaned loudly and fell to the ground. William was near the barn, deciding it would be faster to check there first when he heard a distinct groan of pain. He ran full speed into the barn to find Molly tied to a chair. Only her right leg was free of the bonds, and he suspected it was the reason Duster was now rolling on the barn floor, hands between his legs, practically sobbing. "William," she breathed as soon as she saw him. "Molly." He rushed to her side and began to untie her. "You're bleeding." "He hit me, but it doesn't matter. Just get me out of here." After untying her, he began rubbing her feet, trying to get the blood to circulate faster. Just as they were about to stand up, Molly saw something behind William. "William, watch out!" William turned in time to see Joshua moving in to attack him with a broken bottle. William launched himself at Joshua, and the bottle was knocked free of his hand. William and Joshua went down on the floor. They rolled, first Joshua on top, punching William in his bad eye. William yelled in pain, and the room started spinning. Joshua was winding up for another hit. "I've got to get up," William thought. William blocked his face with his forearm just in time. While Duster recovered from the block, William swung his elbow in Joshua's direction and felt it hit just as he heard a crack. Duster collapsed with his hands over his nose. William staggered to his feet and leaned against the barn stall. He could think only about Molly and whether she was hurt. And then there she was in front of him, his beautiful Molly. The Molly he had almost lost, just as he had lost Elizabeth. He couldn't handle losing someone again. But she wasn't lost. And William decided right then and there that he would make sure that he would never be without her again. William took a step toward her, arms wide, wanting nothing more than to hold her. "William," Molly screamed. "Watch out." But it was too late. Duster had run headfirst into William's gut and knocked the wind out of him. William went down, and Duster went with him. How in the world did Duster have this much stamina when he was so drunk? But now was not the time to ponder such questions. William covered his face with both arms. He knew he couldn't afford to take another hit to the face, or he would be out, and Molly would be at the mercy of a drunk and violent Duster. William kicked and twisted, trying to get free. He knew Duster was drunk, and he knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. The question was whether William could last longer than him. Just then, Joshua Duster stopped hitting and collapsed forward, face down onto William. William was shocked that it was finally over and lay still for a moment, trying to figure out what had happened. He finally pushed the limp body from him and looked up long enough to see Molly, crying and holding a shovel. William stayed down, trying to catch his breath. He heard the shovel fall to the ground, and then Molly was there, kneeling over him. "Are you okay?" she asked, a hand on his cheek. Without waiting for an answer, she kissed him, long and hard. She finally pulled away. "Are you okay?" she asked again. "If I say no, will you kiss me again?" She smiled and laughed, but the laugh turned into a sob. She couldn't hold it back anymore. She began to cry. William sat up, wincing slightly as he crossed his legs in front of him. He pulled Molly onto his lap, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed. Eventually, her tears abated into hiccups. When she pulled away enough to look at him, William kissed her for a long time. "I'm so glad you're safe," he said finally. "Me too," Molly managed. She slid off his lap, and William stood, taking her hands to pull her up. "You've got a nasty cut on your head. What happened?" "I think he hit me with his gun, but that's nothing. Are you okay?" She was looking at his eye, which had been hit twice in as many days. "I'm worried it will damage your vision." "I can see you just fine." He smiled, but then grew serious. "Molly, when Hank told me you were in danger, I couldn't stand it. The pain was unbearable. I knew then, but I think I've known it since the moment I saw you standing in my sitting room 3 days ago. I love you, Molly Ryan. I want to marry you if you'll have me." "I love you, William Cecil." Molly kissed him again with as much passion as she could manage. "I've wanted to marry you since the first night when you told me there was a breeze blowing the stars around." He looked confused, but let it pass. "We need to figure out what to do with Duster." "Oh, Sally," exclaimed Molly suddenly. "Is she all right?" "I don't know. I think Hank got her to the doctor since she wasn't in the buckboard when he came to get me. The best we can do is pray." "Can't you arrest him, William?" "Arrest him?" William looked at her as if she had asked whether the sun would rise. "Molly, he fired a gun at you. Twice. He struck you down, tied you to a chair, and laid hands on you in his own barn. That is assault, and I will call it abduction to any judge in the territory. He isn't walking out of my cell until the district judge comes through, and I don't care how long that takes." Molly let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "And Sally, what he did to Sally, that is the part that has been eating at me." He rubbed his jaw. "I can hold him for what he did to you, but what he did to her happened behind his own door, and half the men on any jury will have wives at home. I want more than my word and yours. I want the kind of charge that puts a man away for years." He looked at the disgusting man out cold at their feet. "Because if he gets loose, he will track her down, and the next time he will kill her." "Then find something," Molly said. She stamped her foot. "Stop standing there being so sheriffy and find something." William, in spite of everything, almost smiled. Then his eye caught something on the ground. He bent down to examine the bottle Duster had used in his attempted attack. "Where did this bottle come from?" "He was drinking out of it when I woke up. And then, when you tackled him, he dropped it." Without another word, William started walking around the barn, looking in the stalls. Molly followed him closely, curious about what he was doing, but also afraid to let him out of her sight. Finally, William found what he was looking for. In one of the stalls were several wooden barrels and crates of empty bottles. William grinned. "Now we've got him twice over." "What is all this?" "This, my dear lady, is a whiskey-making operation." "Is that illegal?" "Not if you make it for yourself, but that's not what he's been doing. See these bottles? Bottles exactly like this have been turning up at the Dutchman's cabin and in the drover's camp since spring, and I only heard about it yesterday in Bill Crowley's chair. He's been selling whiskey to the locals without a license and without paying the government 1 cent of tax on it. That is a federal offense, Molly. It's the marshal's business, and the marshal doesn't go easy. Between what he did to you today and this, he'll be going away for a long time. I would guess he's been sampling his own product too, which is why he's been arriving at the saloon already drunk lately. And he's a mean drunk." Chapter 16. Molly and William arrived at the sheriff's office with Joshua Duster, gagged and bound, draped over his own horse. William got down and then helped Molly. "Why don't you go in and check on Mother and Hank?" William instructed. "I'm going to get Duster locked up and squared away. He's going to have to stay here until the district judge comes through, and I'll wire the marshal at Cheyenne about that whiskey." "You know," Molly said thoughtfully, "now that we're getting married, we really should consider building a place some ways out of town. It's not safe to live next to where the criminals are held. What if we have children? I don't want them anywhere around the likes of him." William looked at her thoughtfully. "What would we do with the house?" "I don't know." Molly shrugged. "Rent it to your deputy?" "I don't have a deputy," William reminded her. "I know. That's something else we will need to discuss." Hank was pacing the room when Molly entered, clearly agitated. "Hank," she said, worry settling in her stomach. "What's wrong?" "Mother," was all Hank would say. Oh no, Hank, knock on that door and tell William to hurry. Molly quickly crossed the room and opened Agnes's door. Agnes. Molly sank to her knees and took her hand. She could hear shuffling behind her and turned to see William and Hank standing helplessly against the wall. She motioned for them to come closer. Hank went around the other side of the bed and William moved closer to Molly. Agnes's eyes fluttered open and focused on the three around her. Oh, good, you made it. She shifted her focus to William. Do you have any news for me? William's eyes were wet, but he managed a smile. You were right, Mother. Molly and I are going to get married. Agnes smiled. That's what I was waiting for. She weakly pointed at the bureau. Get that package, dear. That's for you and Molly. A wedding present. She looked at each of her sons, and then her eyes settled on Molly. Take care of my boys, won't you? Of course. I'm not going anywhere. Agnes patted Molly's cheek and then closed her eyes. Only minutes later, Agnes's breathing slowed, and then she was gone. Hank walked out, and Molly started to follow him, worried that he would disappear again. This time, William stopped her. I'll follow him and make sure he's okay. He looked at Molly intently. Their eyes were glistening with tears, and Molly reached up to wipe a tear that had escaped down his face. I'm so sorry, William, she said gently. He gathered her in his arms and held her tight, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. She could feel his silent tears in her hair. Finally, he pulled away. You should go look after Hank, Molly instructed. He's going to need you. I'll go to the undertaker, but it's getting late. I hope he's still there. I'll also stop in to check on Sally. William nodded. Thanks, Molly. He hesitated a moment, bent to kiss her tenderly, and then left. The undertaker was still at his bench with a lamp lit. He was a long, gray man named Purdy, who spoke very softly, as men in his line learned to, and he did not seem surprised to see her. Agnes had been in to see him in March, he said. Everything was arranged. Everything was paid. He would come up to the house tonight himself. Molly thanked him and went out into the dusk with the odd, light-headed feeling of having been handed a burden she had already braced herself to carry. The doctor's house was at the other end of the street. She had passed it every day and never looked at it. Now she stood on the step with her hand raised and found she was afraid to knock, and knocked anyway. Abernathy was younger than she had expected, and tired, with his sleeves rolled and a smear of something on his forearm he had not yet washed off. He looked at her face and did not ask who she was. She's awake, he said. She's been asking for you. Come through. He stopped her in the passage with a hand on her arm and dropped his voice. You should know before you go in. There was a child. There isn't any longer. She knows. I told her because she asked me straight and I don't lie to my patients. He rubbed his eyes. Her body will mend. A few weeks. The rest I can't speak to. The back room was small and clean and smelled of carbolic. Sally lay on a narrow cot under a gray blanket, propped on 2 pillows, and her face was so bruised and swollen that for a moment Molly did not know where to look. Then Sally's good eye found her, and Molly went and knelt by the cot and took her hand, and Sally's fingers closed on hers hard enough to hurt. He told you, Sally said. Her lip made the words thick. Yes. I only knew for sure a week. I hadn't even... She stopped. Her chest rose and fell. I was going to tell you when you came out again. I was going to say it out loud to somebody who would be glad. I would have been glad, Molly said. I am glad you were going to tell me. They stayed like that a while. The doctor moved about in the front room and did not come in. Where is he? Sally asked at last. In William's cell. He isn't coming out. William says the judge will see to that, and I believe him. Sally shut her eye. Something in her face let go, very slightly. Then I'll say it now, while I have the courage. I am not going back to that house, Molly. Not tonight. Not to fetch my things. Not ever. If the doctor wants to keep me here, I'll stay here, and if he doesn't, I will sleep on the boardwalk before I sleep in a room that man has walked into. She opened the eye again. That isn't me asking. I know what I said out at the ranch. I made my choice. Well, I am making another one. Molly held her hand in both of hers. You're coming home with me, she said, tonight. Agnes died an hour ago, and there is a bed, and there is a woman in that house who needs another woman in it. And that is the truth and not charity. Will you come? Sally looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once and began to cry quietly, the way you cry when you have been holding it a very long time and can finally set it down. Dr. Abernathy carried her. He said he would not have her walk and he would not have her jolted in a wagon, and he lifted her, blanket and all, as if she weighed nothing. And Molly walked ahead of them up the dark street, with her lamp held high so he could see the ruts. Hank and William were seated at the dinner table, drinking coffee, when Molly returned an hour later. She came in from outside, but she wasn't alone. The town doctor followed Molly, and in his arms was Sally Duster. William looked at Molly in alarm. Molly started talking before William had a chance to speak. She asked to come. She said she would not spend one more night under that man's roof, and I told her she wouldn't have to, doctor. She turned to the man behind her. Follow me. I'll show you where you can lay her down. When Molly and the doctor returned, Molly thanked the doctor and saw him out the door, then turned slowly to face a stunned William. What are you doing? We have to deal with my mother who is still in her bed. I know, said Molly, holding up her hand, but I really have thought this through. Molly took a seat next to the men and looked at them sternly. I went to the undertaker's, and he said he would be here later tonight. These had already arranged to have a coffin made, and it's even paid for. After that, I went to see Sally. William, Hank, she wasn't doing well. She's beat up badly, as you saw for yourself. The doctor said that she would recover from her injuries, but it's her heart I'm worried about. Is Miss Sally okay? Hank asked. Hank was worried about Miss Sally, William interjected. That's where he was last night. He heard us talking about Joshua hurting her, and he went over there and watched from the barn to make sure she would be okay. When Joshua got home this morning and started wailing on her, apparently Hank ran in there and got in a few wallops of his own. Duster got scared enough and retreated to the barn. That's when Hank left to fetch you. Nobody told me to go, Hank said. He was looking at the table and not at either of them, but his voice was as steady as it always was. I decided. She isn't safe there. I like her. You decided right, Hank, said Molly. That explains so much. Well, Hank, Molly went on gently, her body is going to be okay. The doctor said that whoever stopped Joshua might have saved her life. I guess that's you, Hank, but her heart hurts right now. She lost her baby. She looked at William. I know I should have asked you before I brought her here, but she needs someone to take care of her. And with Agnes gone, we need another woman in the house until we can marry. I thought it might be a good solution. William sighed. I hadn't thought of that. Molly, I would have married you tonight if we needed to. I know you would have, but, she shrugged, I want Agnes taken care of first. I want to give you time to grieve. Later that night, the undertaker arrived at the Cecil home carrying the instructions Agnes had left about her burial and funeral, and in a second envelope addressed to the preacher, what turned out to be her instructions for a wedding, complete in every particular but the date, which she had left blank. The wedding was to be private, just Hank, William, Molly, and the preacher, especially not Mabel of the Quilting Society. The next day, they held Agnes's funeral. Hank cried into Molly's lap, and William held onto her hand. Molly's tears ran down her face. She had come to love Agnes, and in 5 short days had come to consider her a combination of mother, grandmother, and friend. 3 things she had not had when she left home to make a new life in Deadwater Creek. She would miss her sorely. That night, after Hank had gone up to the loft and Sally had been led back to bed, Molly and William sat together across the dining room table, holding hands. There's something I need to show you, William said. He got up and left the room but came back with a package in hand. He sat back down and placed the package between them. What's this? Molly asked. This is the package I picked up on the day you got your new dress. William grinned at her and his eyes lit up in a way that Molly hadn't seen since Agnes died. Is it possible that was only 3 days ago? It feels like a lifetime. It's the package Mother told us was a wedding present right before she died. Remember? Yes, said Molly, but I had forgotten. Me too, but I remembered it later today. Should we open it together? She nodded, and together they removed the brown packaging. Inside, they found a box. William opened the box to reveal a simple wedding ring. I think, said William, that this is for you. He took the ring and slid it onto her finger. "It's beautiful," Molly murmured. "When did she order this?" It had to have been months ago. At least 8 months. It takes a while for goods like this to reach us out here. Prosody, William looked at her and quirked an eyebrow. "About the time she started writing you. Looks like she knew about you from the first." Molly shook her head in disbelief. "I guess so. You know, she left me something too." This time it was Molly who got up and returned with something in her hand. She set it on the table. Before she could say anything, however, William snatched up the book. "Where did you get this?" He sounded upset. "I told you. Agnes gave it to me before she passed. She told me I couldn't read it until we were married, but I figure there's no harm since we're going to be married by the end of the week." She trailed off when she noticed William opening the book and ruffling through the pages. He swore quietly under his breath. "What?" Molly asked. "This is my book," he finally replied. "This is the book I used to take outside with me to write down my thoughts. Why did she have this? And why would she give it to you?" Molly took the book from him. "Do you mind?" she asked before she opened the pages. He hesitated a moment, but then nodded his permission. Molly opened the book to a random page and read. She flipped to another page and read again. This time she started laughing. "Hey," William said angrily, "I'm not going to let you read this if you're just going to laugh at me." "Oh, darling," said Molly. She reached over to pet his arm as if she were soothing his injured pride. She stood up and left the room again, quickly returning with a clutch of papers. "I'm not laughing at what you wrote. I'm laughing at Agnes. Dear, smart, wonderful Agnes. These are the letters she wrote to me. Read them, William." William, brows furrowed, started to read the letters. "What in the?" he said under his breath. He swore again. "These are my words. She wrote letters to you using my words." He put the letters down and sat back. For a long moment he said nothing at all. "She had no right," he said at last, and his voice was low. "Those pages were mine. Some of them I wrote the winter after Elizabeth died, when I couldn't say a word of it out loud to anybody. She went into my room and took them, and she mailed them to a stranger." "I know," Molly said quietly. She did not reach for him, and she did not argue. "And it was those words that convinced me to come out here." She went on after a while. "William, I fell in love with you through these words. I thought maybe something like this might have happened." "You did not," he said in disbelief. "You could not have guessed this." "Well, no, not this exactly. Do you remember that first night? You put your jacket around my shoulders and said something about the breeze blowing the stars around?" "No," he said. He took back the book and started thumbing through it again, looking for that phrase. "Well, you did. And I remember thinking, he might not have written those letters, but there was a piece of him in them, the piece that I fell in love with. So that's why I decided to wait it out. And it turns out I was right. You might not have written those letters, but they were your words." He put the book down and looked into Molly's eyes for a long time. "My mother lied to you for 8 months," he said, "and she stole from me. I loved her, and I'll miss her every day of my life. But I won't pretend that what she did was right." "It wasn't right," Molly said. "I told her so that second morning, and I meant it. What she did was wrong, William, and the Lord took a wrong thing and made something good out of it anyway. That doesn't make the wrong right. It only shows you what he is like." William was quiet. Then he reached across the table and turned the ring on her finger with his thumb. "Then I'll thank him for you," he said, "and I'll work on forgiving her for the rest. It may take me a while. She would have said you were being stubborn. She would have been right." He picked up the book again, more gently this time, and turned it over in his hands. "You truly loved this? Bullfrogs and all?" "Bullfrogs most of all." Chapter 17. Sally was awake when Molly looked in on her the next morning. She lay on her back with her hands folded over the quilt, looking at the ceiling. The swelling had gone down around her eye, but the bruise had darkened to the color of a plum. "I keep counting," Sally said before Molly could ask how she felt. "I would have been showing by harvest. I had already picked out the drawer I meant to line for a cradle." She turned her head on the pillow. "Is that foolish, to grieve somebody I never met?" "No," Molly sat on the edge of the bed. It isn't foolish at all. Joshua doesn't know about the baby. I never told him. Sally's mouth trembled and then set. I don't want him to know. Not ever. He doesn't get to have that. Molly took her hand and held it. There was nothing to say, so she said nothing, and for a while the two of them sat in the quiet. I want to talk to the sheriff, Sally said at last. Today, I want him to write down what Joshua did to me. All of it, every time, from the first week. I know what folks will say about a wife who tells. Let them. She drew a breath. I said nothing for a year, Molly. I am done saying nothing. I'll fetch him, said Molly. William came in with paper and a pen and sat in the chair by the window with his hat on his knee. He did not hurry her. When Sally faltered, he waited, and when she wept, he looked at the floor until she was ready to go on. It took most of the morning. When it was done, Sally signed her name at the bottom in a hand that hardly shook at all, and William folded the pages away inside his coat. That's the last of him, Sally said. She lay back on the pillow. I don't care what becomes of that ranch. I never want to see it again. If it ever comes to me, I mean to sell it, and I mean to decide for myself what to do with the money. She glanced at Molly, and something very like her old smile came and went. I have an idea or two. William went out alone that afternoon. He told Molly he was going to look at a piece of land, which was true. He did not tell her that he stopped first at the graveyard, or that he stood a long while at a small stone that had been there 5 years, or that he had never once come to it in all that time without feeling he ought to beg its pardon. The stone said only Elizabeth Cecil and the 2 dates. I'm getting married the day after tomorrow, he said aloud. The words sounded strange in the open air. Nobody answered him but a meadowlark. He waited for the old weight to come down on his shoulders. It always had. Every morning for a year he had woken and reached across the bed. Every time he passed the saloon he remembered running. It did not come. He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, and tried to understand why. It was not that he had stopped missing her. He had missed her at breakfast. It was that, standing here, he found he could not make himself believe Elizabeth would want to be the reason another woman went home alone. She had not been that kind of woman. She had laughed at him for brooding. She would have taken one look at Molly Ryan with flour on her wrists and told him to stop being a fool. For 5 years he had told himself that loving again would be a kind of betrayal. Standing at her grave, he saw it plainly at last. The betrayal would have been to bury the whole of himself in here with her, and to call that faithfulness. I loved you, he said. I still do. That isn't going to change. He put his hat back on. But I'm going to love her too. I think you would have liked her. He walked back to town lighter than he had come. It was not Molly who had lifted the weight, and it was not his mother. It was only the truth, which had been waiting for him there the whole time. That evening he found Molly under the aspens at the edge of the property where they had stood the first night. The leaves had come out since then. They moved in the breeze, and the sound of them was like soft rain. Sally told me she gave you her statement, Molly said. Every word of it. She has more grit than any man I ever locked up, Duster included. He leaned against the same trunk as before. She said something else, too. She said if there's ever a bakery in this town, she wants a share in it. Said she can keep books, and she has done more washing than any 3 women alive. Molly laughed, and then stopped. A bakery. You mentioned it, he said mildly, once or twice. She looked at him hard, but his face gave nothing away, and after a moment she let it go. She had learned that much about him already. Can I ask you a hard thing? You will anyway. Are you marrying me because Agnes told you to? Because she was dying, and she asked, and you couldn't say no to her? It was very quiet. Somewhere down by the creek, a bullfrog started up, and then another. I asked myself that, William said, last night and again this morning, so I went and asked somebody else. He told her then about the graveyard and the meadowlark and what he had understood there. He told it plainly, the way he told everything. When he was done, Molly was crying a little, and she was not ashamed of it. I was afraid I would be second, she said. All my life, second to her. You're not second. You're not first either. That isn't how it works. He took her hand. I'll be a fool sometimes, Molly. I'll go quiet on you. Some days I'll want to ride out to that bottomland and not come home till dark. And I don't know how to be a father. There's a fair chance I'll be a hard one because I'll be so afraid of losing any of you. I don't know how to be a wife, Molly said. I know how to be a granddaughter and a baker, and I know how to run in a skirt. That is about the extent of it. And I want babies, William. A house full of them. If that frightens you, say so now. It frightens me half to death, he smiled. I want them anyway. Then we'll be frightened together. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Now tell me the truth. Are you going to make me live next door to that jail forever? Not forever. He would say no more than that, and there was that look again, the one that gave nothing away. Overhead, the aspen leaves went on whispering. Molly leaned back against him and listened. She could hear the crickets now, under the frogs and the wind, and William's heart against her shoulder. All of them at once, and none of them louder than the others. It sounded like the beginning of a life. Chapter 18. Molly was up before the light on the last whole day she would ever be Molly Ryan, and she did what she always did when she could not think what else to do. She lit the stove and made bread. Not 4 loaves this time. 12, and 2 trays of sweet rolls, and a plain cake she meant to ice later, if the day allowed it. Whoever came back to the sheriff's house after the wedding tomorrow, and she suspected now that it would be more than the 4 Agnes had planned on, would not go home hungry. She worked in the gray light with the door open to the yard, and by the time the sun came over the roofs, the kitchen was warm, and the whole house smelled the way she thought heaven probably smelled. Sally came out in her wrapper and sat at the table and watched her. She was steadier on her feet today. The bruise had gone from plum to yellow at the edges. "You do that like you're praying," Sally said. Molly looked down at her hands in the dough. "Maybe I am." Jane Robinson arrived at 9 with a parcel as big as a hat box and her cheeks pink from the walk. "I stayed up till 2, she announced, and put the parcel on the table among the loaves without ceremony. "Billy says I'm a fool. Open it. No, wash your hands first. You'll get flour on the silk." It was the green. Jane had finished the green one first, and it was more beautiful than the fabric had been on the bolt, if that was possible. The bodice was cut close, and the sleeves came just below the elbow, and there was a line of small covered buttons down the front that Jane must have sewn on by lamplight, one by one. "Try it," said Jane. "Go on. Sally, help her." It fit. Of course it fit. Jane had the measurements of every woman in the county in her head, and she stood back with her hands clasped under her chin and looked at Molly the way Molly looked at a loaf that had risen right. "Well," said Jane, "he's done for. Not that he wasn't already." Sally said nothing. She was crying a little and smiling, and she took Molly's hand and squeezed it, and Molly understood that this was the first good thing that had happened to Sally in a year, and that she was glad of it. That was worth more than the dress. "The blue will be a week yet," Jane said briskly and blew her nose. "I'll not have it said I sent a bride to the altar in a dress with a crooked hem." She found Hank behind the barn at noon. He had been out there since breakfast. He had been out there, Molly realized, most of every day since Agnes died, and nobody had said anything, because nobody had known what to say. He was not working. He was sitting on an upturned bucket with his back against the barn wall, looking at nothing, and at his feet was a bundle of brown paper gone soft with damp. The lilac start from Lionsgate. Molly had forgotten it entirely. Hank had not. "Hank," she said, "I think we should plant that today. It won't keep much longer." He looked at the bundle and not at her. "I don't know where. Where do you think it would like to be?" He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "She used to look out the window. Mother, in the mornings when she couldn't sleep. There isn't anything to look at out that window. Just the fence." "Then that's where it goes," Molly said. They dug it in together under Agnes's window on the sunny side. Hank chose the spot to the inch, and Molly did as she was told, which he seemed to find restful. He showed her how to spread the roots and firm the earth with the heel of her hand, and how much water it wanted, which was more than she would have guessed. When it was done, they stood back, the 2 of them, and looked at a stick with 4 leaves on it standing in a patch of turned dirt. It won't flower this year, Hank said. Maybe not next year. 'Tis set. Mother said I would have peas by June. She said she would eat the first one. His voice did not change at all. His hands hanging at his sides opened and closed. She isn't going to see them. Molly did not touch him. She had learned that much. She stood beside him and looked at the lilac and said, "Then we'll take her the first ones, you and me. We'll walk down and put them on her stone, and you can tell her how many." Hank considered this. She would want the number, he agreed. And then, because he was Hank, he walked off toward the garden without another word, and Molly let him go. She was still standing there when he came back. He had something in his hand, and he held it out to her without ceremony, the way he did everything. It was a pea shoot, 2 inches high, pale green, curled at the top like a question. "They came up," Hank said. "This morning. You said you were going to wait for seeds, so?" He put it in her palm and stepped back. "That one's yours. There are more." Molly closed her hand around it very carefully and found that she could not, for a moment, say anything at all. William spent the afternoon buying things he could not afford. He did it in the order he had planned it in, lying awake in the loft. First the bank, where Mr. Hollis looked at him over his ledger for a long moment, and then said that the town had been waiting 5 years for the sheriff to want something, and he supposed the town could stand him the loan. Then the empty store at the end of Main Street, which belonged to a widow in Omaha who had been trying to sell it since the roof went. William wired her an offer that was fair and not 1 cent over, and had her answer inside the hour, and stood in the dusty front room afterward with the key in his hand and tried to see it with ovens in it. He could not, but he could see Molly in it, which was the same thing. Then Ed Miller. Ed was sitting on his own porch with his boots off and a letter from Philadelphia in his lap, and he did not get up. He had the look of a man who has been waiting for somebody to come and ask him the question he most wants to answer. "The land," William said. "The 40 acres past the creek. You never built on it." "Never had a reason. She was gone before I got the well dug." Ed folded the letter. "She's asking me to come east, Sheriff. Says the children don't remember my face. I don't know as I blame them. I can't give you what it's worth. I know what you can give me. Everybody in this town knows what everybody else can give." Ed named a figure. It was low. It was, William thought, about $2 lower than it might have been, and Ed's face when he said it had a look of a man settling a private account. William put out his hand, and Ed took it. "You'll want to build before the snow," Ed said. "I'll draw you where the water is." William walked home in the long light with the store key in one pocket and a paper in the other, and the strong sense that he had just spent more money in an afternoon than in the whole of his life before it, and that his mother, wherever she was laughing at him. He did not tell Molly. He wanted to see her face. He had a great many things he wanted to see her face for, he was finding, and it seemed to him he had a good long time to get through them all. Bill Crowley came by at supper time with his razor case under his arm and his hat in his hand. "I'm not stopping," he said, before anybody could ask him to. "Only I heard the sheriff's getting married tomorrow, and I heard he hasn't been near my chair in 4 days, and I'll not have it said in this town that William Cecil went to his own wedding looking like a mountain man. Sit down, Sheriff. This one's on the house." Prosody. William, who had come in from the office in his shirt sleeves, looked at Molly. Molly looked at the ceiling. "I see how it's going to be," he said, and sat. So the last evening went by. Bill shaved him at the kitchen table with a towel around his neck, and Sally holding the lamp, and talked the whole time, and told them Ed Miller had lost his $2 and was bearing it bravely. Hank sat in the corner with his seed catalog and did not read it. Molly iced the cake. And when Bill had gone and Sally had gone to bed and Hank had climbed to the loft, William came and stood behind her at the table and put his chin down on the top of her head, and neither of them said anything for a while. "Bill says I look fit to be married," he said at last. "Bill is right about most things." She turned in his arms and looked at him. Clean jaw, hair cut close. The eye had gone down to a shadow. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." "Good," said Molly. "So am I." She reached up and touched his cheek, smooth under her palm. "Now go to bed, William Cecil. I have to be up at 4. Somebody has to feed this town." He went, but he stopped at the foot of the loft ladder and looked back at her, standing in the lamplight among the loaves in her working dress with a smear of icing on her wrist. And she saw him fix the picture in his mind the way she had once fixed a line about bullfrogs. Then he climbed up out of sight, and she put out the lamp and stood a moment in the dark listening to the crickets. Tomorrow, she thought, not 7 days after all, a whole life. Chapter 19. The next day, on the day that Molly would have boarded the first train back to New York from Deadwater Creek, Molly and William exchanged vows. Molly wore her new dress, and William looked handsome in pressed trousers and a Sunday shirt. Hank stood at William's side, and Sally stood at Molly's. Agnes's wedding instructions had called for only 4 people: William, Molly, Hank, and the preacher. Agnes, for once in her life, had underestimated her town. They came anyway. Not to the house, because nobody had been asked, but they lined the boardwalk on both sides of the street, from the sheriff's office to the church door, in their Sunday clothes on a Thursday morning, and stood there as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be doing at 10 o'clock. Bill Crowley had shut his shop. Jane Robinson stood at the church steps, with her hands clasped under her chin, exactly as she had stood over the green dress. Creed was there in a collar, which nobody had ever seen, with 3 of his girls beside him looking scrubbed and shy. Ed Miller, who had lost $2, took his hat off as Molly went by and said "ma'am," as if she had done him a personal kindness. Molly walked down the middle of the street on nobody's arm, because there was nobody to give her away, and she had decided in the night that she would rather walk alone than be handed over by a stranger. She had thought it would feel lonely. It did not. She had the pea shoot pressed in Graham's Bible in her hand, and Sally 2 steps behind her, and the whole of Deadwater Creek on either side, and she thought that Graham, who had never had one thing with her name on it, would have liked to see this. The preacher was brief, because Agnes had told him to be, in writing, with the date left blank. William's hands were not quite steady when he put the ring on her finger, and his voice was, and afterward he could not have said what he had promised, except that he had meant all of it. Molly said her part in a clear voice that carried to the back of the church. Hank stood at his brother's side and looked at the floor the whole time, and said afterward that he had heard every word, and that she had said it right. When they came out, the town did not cheer. It was not a cheering town. But the men took their hats off all down the street, one after another, like a wind going through wheat, and Molly walked back up the middle of it as Mrs. Cecil, with her hand in her husband's, and did not try to stop the tears. Agnes had said no people, and Agnes was obeyed to the letter. Nobody came into the house. They came into the yard instead. By the time the wedding party turned the corner of the sheriff's office, there were trestles set up under Hank's aspens with sheets over them, and on the sheets was every dish in Deadwater Creek that could be carried a 1/4 mile without spilling. Molly's 12 loaves and 2 trays of sweet rolls looked in that company like a modest beginning. Jane had brought her mother's good china and would let nobody else handle it. Creed had brought a keg, on which William looked hard until Creed said it was cider and he could taste it if he liked. Mabel Young had brought a pound cake. Molly cut it herself and ate a slice standing where Mabel could see, and said it was very good, which was a lie, and Mabel went home happy, which was not. Sally sat in Agnes's rocking chair, which somebody had carried out into the sun, with a plate on her knee, and the townswomen coming up to her one at a time, awkward and kind, to say the small things women say. She let them. Molly watched her from across the yard and saw her laugh once at something Jane said and put her hand over her mouth as if she had surprised herself. Hank did not come out. He stood at the kitchen window and watched, and when Molly went in to him, he said, without turning, "There are too many." "I know," said Molly. "You don't have to come out, but there's a plate for you here, and I saved you the corner of the cake because I know you like the corner." She put it on the sill beside him and went back out, and when she looked again, the plate was gone and Hank was still at the window, and that was as much of a wedding as Hank wanted, and it was enough. By 4 o'clock, the yard was empty, and the sheets were folded, and Creed's keg, tasted, had gone back down the street on Creed's shoulder. William found Molly at the pump with her sleeves rolled, washing Jane's mother's china because Jane had finally been persuaded to go home. "Mrs. Cecil," he said. She looked up. It was the first time anybody had said it who was not teasing. "Come with me a minute," he said. "Leave the plates." They went to the graveyard alone. They stood in front of the mound that was Agnes's grave. Molly laid her wedding flowers at the foot of the grave while William looked on. "Well," William said as he took his new bride by the hand. "Are you ready?" "Ready?" Molly asked. "Ready for what?" "Ready for life as the wife of the sheriff of Deadwater Creek." Molly put her arms around William's neck and kissed him the best way she knew how, knowing he would know her answer. Knowing that Molly would not be content with life as just someone's wife, even if that someone was the sheriff of Deadwater Creek, William had another ace up his sleeve. On their first morning as husband and wife, Sally had made them the perfect honeymoon breakfast, which they ate alone, together, outside in Hank's garden. Afterward, William told her to get dressed for a stroll. Molly could tell that her husband was up to something, but she had not the slightest inkling what it could be. With her parasol over her head and her arms safely tucked into William's, Mr. and Mrs. Cecil walked side by side through the town that was now theirs, in which they would raise their children and grow old together, God willing. Molly looked toward the far end of Main Street, where she noticed a freshly painted sign hanging from the building that had stood vacant for a long while before her arrival in town. The sign read, "Graham's Bakery and Treats." She looked at William and was about to ask him who had taken up the building when the smile on his face stopped her in her tracks. "What have you done?" She squinted at him. "I heard all about you impressing all and sundry about town with your sweet rolls and cinnamon buns." He winked. "You didn't think you would get away with lazing about all day and night, being just the sheriff's wife, did you?" "Lazing about, would I?" She punched his arm lovingly. "Got to keep you busy. Idle hands are the devil's playground, so they say. Besides, Sally informed me she means to be your partner in it, and I have learned not to argue with the women of this town." "Oh, William, thank you. Have I mentioned how much I love you?" "Not since breakfast, which is really an unacceptably long time to leave a man waiting, you do know," William teased. But the bakery was not the end of the surprises William had in store for his bride. Not half a mile from the bakery was the Miller's land. The Millers had never gotten around to building their home before Mrs. Miller walked out on her husband, taking the children with her back to the city life on the East Coast. William had made Mr. Miller an offer he could not refuse for the large piece of land, as Mr. Miller only wanted to join his family as soon as he was possibly able to. Molly would have her home near the bakery. Hank would have a piece of land on which to garden and grow vegetables and fruit to sell locally. Sally would have a cottage of her own on the land. William would employ a deputy who would take up residence in the house in which his beloved mother had passed away after she was secure in the knowledge that her boys would have Molly to look after them. Chapter 20. The district judge came through on the third Monday in May, and Deadwater Creek held court in the schoolhouse because it was the only room in town with enough benches. His name was Ambrose Tull. He was a small, dry man with a small, dry voice and a way of looking over his spectacles that made grown men check their boots for mud. And he had ridden 200 miles of territory since April with a saddlebag full of other people's troubles. He set his hat on the teacher's desk, put on a black coat that had seen better decades, and told the room he would hear the matter of the territory against Joshua Duster, and he would hear it today, and anybody with an opinion on the weather could keep it to himself. The room was full. It had been full since 8. William had brought Duster over from the cell in irons at 9:30, and the walk down the middle of the street had been made in a silence so complete that Molly, watching from the schoolhouse step, could hear the chain. Duster looked smaller than she remembered. 5 weeks in a cell had taken the color out of him, and the drink, and without the drink, there seemed to be less of him altogether. He did not look at her. He looked at the floor, and then at the 12 men on the front bench, and then at the floor again. Ed Miller was on the jury. So was Bill Crowley, which William had tried to prevent and the judge had allowed, on the grounds that if he threw out every man in the county who talked, he would have no jury at all. The prosecuting attorney was a young man from Cheyenne named Fenwick, who had come up on the same coach as the judge and had spent the whole of Sunday in the sheriff's office reading Sally's statement with his lips moving. Duster had no one. He had been offered a lawyer and had said he did not want a lawyer. He wanted a drink, and Judge Tull had noted that down without expression. William gave his evidence first, standing with his hat in his hand. He told it flat and plain, the way he told everything. The shots, the blood on the mattress, the barn, the chair, the bottle. He did not raise his voice once. When Fenwick asked him whether he had struck the prisoner, William said, "Yes, sir, several times. He was on top of me at the time." And one of the old men from Bill's wall laughed and was looked at over the spectacles until he stopped. Then Molly. She had not thought she would be afraid. She was. Her hands were cold and her mouth was dry, and the schoolroom seemed very long from the door to the front. But she had promised Sally, and she had promised herself, and she walked it. She put her hand on the Bible. She told them about the shot over her head and the butt of the gun, and Waking tied to a chair, and what he had said to her about borrowing her. And she said the words plainly because she was not going to soften them for his sake. Fenwick asked her if she was certain it was the prisoner. She looked at Duster for the first time. "Yes," she said. "I am certain. I have thought about his face every night since." When she sat down, William's hand found hers on the bench and did not let go. Then, because Fenwick had asked for it and William had not been able to talk him out of it, he would not go to the front. He said so, standing up at the back by the door in his loud, flat voice, and the room turned around to look at him, and he looked at the floor. Judge Tull studied him over the spectacles for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Cecil, you may give your evidence from where you are. Speak up so the jury can hear you." Hank did not need telling to speak up. He said what he had seen. He said it in order, the way he said everything, with the times in it. When he had got to the barn, how long he had watched, what he had heard through the wall in the morning, how many times, what he had done. He said he had hit Joshua Duster in the face twice and in the stomach once, and that Joshua Duster had run out to the barn, and that then he had gone for Molly. He did not look at anyone while he said it. When he was done, he sat down. Fenwick asked him how he could be sure of the number of blows he had heard. "I counted," said Hank. Fenwick asked him why he had gone out to the ranch in the first place when nobody had told him to. Hank thought about it. The room waited. "Because nobody had told me to," he said at last. "Somebody had to." Judge Tull wrote for some time. Then he said, without looking up, "Thank you, Mr. Cecil, that will do." And Molly, who had learned to hear the small changes in that dry voice, thought it was the gentlest thing he had said all day. The judge looked at his papers. "Mrs. Duster," he said, "I have your statement here, taken by the sheriff and sworn. You are not obliged to say it again. The court will accept it as read if you would rather." The room waited. Molly felt Sally go very still beside her. Then Sally stood up. She was thin. The bruises had gone, but she was thin, and she held the back of the bench in front of her for a moment before she let go of it and walked to the front alone. She had on the plain gray dress Jane had made her and her hair pinned close, and she looked, Molly thought, exactly like what she was. A woman who had walked into a room she had every right to be afraid of and was going to say her piece in it anyway. "I would rather say it," Sally said. "Sir, if it's all the same to the court." "It is not all the same," said Judge Tull, "but you may." So she said it. Not all of it. The judge stopped her twice, gently, and said the court had it in writing. But she said the first week, and the day he took her letters, and the night before Molly came, and she said it looking at the 12 men and not at Duster. And her voice shook and did not stop. When she was done, there was no sound in the schoolhouse at all. Then Ed Miller on the front bench blew his nose like a trumpet and did not seem to care who heard. Duster asked if he had anything to say, said the whiskey was for his own use and everybody knew it, and the sheriff had it in for him. Judge Tull wrote that down too. The jury did not leave the room. They put their heads together for the time it takes to say the Lord's Prayer slowly, and Bill Crowley stood up and said, "Guilty, Judge, on all of it," and sat down. Judge Tull took off his spectacles and looked at Joshua Duster for what seemed a long time. "Mr. Duster," he said, "I have sat in a good many rooms like this one. I have sentenced men who did what they did out of hunger, and men who did it out of drink, and men who did it because they were born wrong and could not help it. I do not know which you are, and I find I do not much care. You fired on a woman. You struck her down and bound her. You beat your wife over the course of a year until she lost the child she was carrying. And you did it in a house you told her she could not leave." He put the spectacles back on. 7 years in the Territorial Penitentiary at Laramie, at hard labor. When the territory is done with you, the United States Marshal has a matter of untaxed liquor he wishes to discuss, and I have told him he may have what is left. Sheriff, take him out. William took him out. The chain went down the middle of the street the way it had come, and the town watched it go, and nobody said a word until the door of the sheriff's office had shut behind it. Sally stood on the schoolhouse step in the sun with Molly's arm through hers and did not move for a while. "Well," she said finally. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the autumn. "That's done. That's done," Molly agreed. Prosody Raikth. "I want to go home now." Sally looked at her, and there was something in her face that Molly had not seen there since a laundry doorway in New York. "I mean the bakery. Is that strange? I keep calling it home." "No," said Molly, "that isn't strange at all." They walked back up the street together, and behind them Bill Crowley reopened his shop. And Creed took his collar off, and Deadwater Creek, having done its duty, went back to minding everybody's business as usual. Epilogue. Graham's Bakery and Treats opened its door for the first time on the first Saturday in June, at 6 in the morning, because Molly said a bakery that opened at any other hour was a tea room and she would not have it said. She had been up since 3. So had Sally, who had turned out to have a gift for pastry that neither of them had suspected, and who now stood at the front counter in a white apron with her hair pinned up and her hands folded, looking at the door as if it might bite. Hank had been up since 4, because Hank did not hold with being left out, and had carried the trays through from the ovens one at a time with such care that Molly had finally told him he could stop, and he had said, "There are 2 more," and gone back for them. At 5:45 there was nobody in the street. At 5 minutes to 6 there was Creed in his shirt sleeves with a basket. At 6 there were 11 people, and by 7 Molly had lost count and stopped trying, and the bell over the door, which William had hung himself and hung crooked, did not stop ringing until noon. They sold out of sweet rolls by 8. Sally wrote it down in the ledger in her neat, careful hand and underlined it, and Molly caught her looking at the figure a long time. Before all that, though, before the door was unbarred and the town let in, the 3 of them had done one other thing. Hank had come to the kitchen door at 5:30 with his hat on and something wrapped in a cloth. He had not said what it was. He had not needed to. Molly had wiped her hands and taken off her apron, and Sally had come too, and the 3 of them had walked down the empty street in the gray light to the graveyard and stood in front of Agnes's stone, and Hank had unwrapped the cloth. Peas, the first picking. 9 pods, fat and green and beaded with dew. He had laid them on the grass at the foot of the stone, one at a time in a row. Then he had straightened up and stood a moment with his hands at his sides. 9, he had said. I said I would tell her the number. Nobody had said anything else. There had not been anything else that needed saying. After a while, Hank had put his hat back on and turned and walked back toward town, and Molly and Sally had followed him, and by the time they reached the bakery door, the sun was on the sign. That night, when the ovens were cold and her feet ached in a way she had almost forgotten, Molly sat down at the kitchen table and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Mr. Kessler. She told him they ate bread in Wyoming now, and that she had lit the ovens at 3. and that his recipe for the sweet rolls had gone in the ledger under her own name because she had improved it, and he could take that up with her when he came out to see for himself. She did not think he would come. She thought he would read the letter twice and put it in the drawer where he kept things, and that was enough. The second was to Daniel. It was shorter because Daniel was not a reader, and it had $1 in it. She told him she had married the sheriff after all, and that he was to tell the dog. She told him the aspens grew in families along the creek and turned gold in October, all at once, as if they had agreed on it, and that she had stood under them now herself, and it was true. She told him Graham's name was over a door. Then she blew out the lamp and went to find her husband, and outside the crickets and the bullfrogs were tuning up for the night, the way the letter had promised they would, the way they always had. When the warden of the territorial penitentiary at Laramie arrived outside the sheriff's office, William knew that he was not bringing welcome news. "Mr. Coombs, what brings you all the way out here to our little neck of the woods?" he asked in his capacity as sheriff. Coombs was a middle-aged man, toughened and honed on the battlefields of the new country. He beat the dust from his hat against his leg and struck up a cigar while eyeing William. "Bad news, I'm afraid." He drew on the cigar and exhaled a plume of smoke before elaborating. "That prisoner we took off your hands in May, Duster, he has gone and got himself killed in the penitentiary, knifed over a card game of all things. Seems he had a widow in Deadwater Creek. You wouldn't know where the estate lawyers can get a hold of her, would you?" "I certainly do," William offered with open relief. "She is with my wife at the bakery down the street." By the end of the day, Sally was the rightful and legal owner of Lionsgate Ranch, all its stock, and a valuable stable of breeding horses. She did not sell it in a hurry. She rode out once, alone, and walked through every room of the house, and then she came back and told Molly she was ready. She sold it that same month, stock and all, and put a full share of the money into Graham's bakery, so that her name went into the ledger beside Molly's. The lawyer who handled the sale, a quiet man named Thomas Starmer, took up a post in town soon after. He called at the bakery a great many times before Sally would let him walk her home, and it was the better part of another year before she felt ready to be courted at all. When she was, it was Sally who told him so. Graham's bakery went from strength to strength, and the townsfolk were at a loss as to how they had ever managed before. Molly and Sally were around to keep them in loaves of bread and cakes. And of course, the saloon and Mr. Creed in particular were among their biggest clients when it came to sweet rolls and cinnamon buns. When Sally became Mrs. Starmer, a heavily pregnant Molly was her matron of honor. Sally ran the bakery on her own while Molly was home with their newborn daughter, Cecil. Then it was Molly's turn to run it single-handedly when the shy Mr. Starmer became a father to their firstborn, a boy they named William for the sheriff. It was a hard birth, and the doctor told them afterward there would be no more. Sally grieved that, as she still quietly grieved the child she had lost at Lionsgate. But she and Thomas adored the one they had beyond measure. William and Molly, for their part, filled their own house to the rafters. 4 brothers and sisters for the proud older sister Cecily. Twins, Rachel and Richard, arrived when Cecily was 2. Little David was born almost 2 years after that, followed over a year later by little Elaine, a fiery redhead who was the spitting image of her mother. William could not have been prouder of his family or his town. God indeed had a plan for him so far beyond his expectations that it often overwhelmed him on those quiet country town nights, when he looked out over his family and his town from Hank's garden. Hank's garden, where the crickets and the bullfrogs conducted their nightly symphonies and lullabies to the Cecil children who would never know the hardships of living in a cramped tenement on the noisy city streets.